The earth was thirsty in Colorado that summer of 1886. Dust rose from the Santa Fe Trail like spectral fingers clinging to the black wool of Clara Maddox's dress as she walked behind the modest pine coffin. Her face, partly concealed beneath a thin black veil, betrayed nothing of the storm that raged within. At 38, Clara had buried more than most, but this particular death had severed her last tether to normalcy. The coffin contained what remained of Thomas Maddox, a postal carrier whose route through Apache territory was considered dangerous but necessary. The official report stated he'd been ambushed, shot 17 times. Excessive, Clara had thought when she'd read the telegram. Even the Apache weren't that wasteful with ammunition. "Ma'am, we should make camp soon," called Jenkins, the lead driver hired to transport her husband's body back to their homestead in New Mexico. "Sun'll be down in an hour." Clara nodded, once her eyes scanning the horizon with practiced precision. 3 ridge lines to the west, a dried creek bed to the south. In her former life she would have noted 5 potential ambush points and 3 escape routes. Now she simply measured the fading daylight. "There's a clearing just beyond that bend," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Fresh water nearby." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "You've traveled this route before." "No." The lie came easily. Clara had traversed this trail dozens of times, but not as a widow in mourning. Back then she'd worn Union blue and carried a Springfield rifle, not grief. That night, as the small party of 4 men and 1 woman settled around a modest fire, Clara sat apart, turning a simple gold wedding band in her fingers. Thomas had been good to her, kind, uncomplicated. He'd never asked about the scars on her back, or the way she sometimes woke gasping for air, reaching for weapons that weren't there. He'd accepted the story that she was a former nurse widowed during the war. He never knew she'd been Scout Sergeant Clara Blackwood, one of the few women who'd served in combat roles during the border conflicts with Mexico, disguised as a young man, until her commander discovered her secret and kept it. She'd joined at 17 after her father's farm was raided. By 20, she'd become known for tracking skills that bordered on supernatural. By 25, she'd led a specialized scout unit into territories where regular soldiers feared to tread. By 30, she'd watched her son, born in secret and raised by her sister, die because faulty intelligence from her commanding officer, Colonel Elias Grant, had sent a supply caravan into an ambush. After that, Clara vanished. Sergeant Blackwood was listed as missing, presumed dead. Clara Maddox emerged 2 years later in a small New Mexico town where she met Thomas, a widower 14 years her senior, with gentle hands and quiet ways. Now Thomas was gone, and Clara felt the old instincts stirring beneath her carefully constructed facade. "Apache territory tomorrow," one of the drivers was saying. "Shouldn't be a problem so long as we stay alert." Clara's attention sharpened. Not Apache territory, not anymore. The Army had pushed them further south 3 years ago. She opened her mouth to correct him, then stopped. Clara Maddox wouldn't know that. "Perhaps we should take a different route," she suggested instead, her tone appropriately demure. "No need to worry, ma'am," Jenkins said with the patronizing smile men reserved for frightened women. "We're well armed. Besides, the most direct route means you can put your husband to rest that much sooner." Clara nodded, feigning gratitude. She'd seen that smile before on the faces of officers who'd underestimated her until they'd seen her return from missions others hadn't survived. Something wasn't right. The hired guards were too confident, Jenkins too insistent on the direct route. Clara counted their weapons, 2 rifles, 3 revolvers visible, more than necessary for a simple transport job. She excused herself and walked to the edge of their small camp, pretending to seek privacy for a moment of grief. Instead, she surveyed the terrain again. The direct route would take them through Serpent's Pass, a narrow ravine perfect for an ambush. A smarter path would be the high trail that added half a day but offered clear sight lines. Clara returned to her bedroll near the wagons, away from the men. As she arranged her modest belongings, her fingers brushed against the hidden pocket in her dress where she kept a small knife, the only weapon Thomas had ever known her to carry. "For cutting thread," she'd told him. Sleep came in fragments, as it always did. Dreams of gunfire and blood, of her son's face, of Thomas's gentle smile. She woke at first light before any of the men stirred. The second day passed in tense silence. Clara noted how Jenkins kept checking his pocket watch, how the youngest guard's eyes darted nervously to the ridge lines. By mid-afternoon she knew with certainty they were riding into trouble. As the ravine of Serpent's Pass appeared in the distance, Clara made her decision. "Mr. Jenkins," she called from her position in the second wagon. "I'm feeling unwell. The heat, perhaps. Might we stop for a short while?" Jenkins barely concealed his annoyance. "Ma'am, we need to clear this pass before sundown. Not safe to camp in the ravine." "Just a few minutes, please," she pressed, manufacturing a tremor in her voice. "I fear I might be ill." With obvious reluctance, Jenkins signaled the drivers to halt. Clara climbed down, steadying herself against the wagon as if dizzy. She walked several paces away behind a large boulder and knelt as if overcome. From this position she could see what the drivers could not, dust rising from behind the ridge to the north, riders moving fast parallel to their position. They would reach the far end of the pass just as the wagons entered. Clara's heartbeat steadied, the familiar calm of combat settling over her. She had perhaps 15 minutes, not enough time to convince Jenkins to turn back, especially if he was complicit. She needed to prepare. Returning to the wagons, she asked for her small traveling case, claiming she needed personal items. Once it was handed down to her, she retreated again, this time opening the case out of sight. Beneath a false bottom lay items Thomas had never seen: a Marine Tosta 1874 revolver with custom grip, 12 rounds of ammunition, a wire garrote, and a small vial of laudanum. Clara quickly secured the revolver beneath her dress, concealed by the fullness of her morning attire. The garrote went into her sleeve. She returned to the wagon, now visibly more composed. "Thank you for your patience, Mr. Jenkins," she said. "I'm quite recovered now." Jenkins nodded, eyes tracking the sun's position. "Glad to hear it, ma'am. We should move on." As they entered the pass, Clara noted everything: the narrowing walls, the loose scree that could trigger small avalanches, the positions of all 4 men. If they were working with the ambushers, they'd likely try to distance themselves when the attack came. The sound came first, a rifle shot echoing off the canyon walls, then chaos. Riders burst from both ends of the ravine, 8, no 10 men faces obscured by bandanas, rifles raised. The lead wagon jerked to a halt as bullets splintered wood inches from the driver's head. "Everybody down!" Jenkins shouted, diving from his seat. Clara didn't move. Instead, she watched as the guards exchanged glances with each other, then fired 2 ineffectual shots well over the heads of the approaching bandits. A performance, then, not a real defense. She allowed herself to be pulled from the wagon by one of the guards. "Stay down, ma'am," he ordered, shoving her roughly behind a wheel. Clara fell deliberately, sprawling in the dust, letting her body go limp. She felt rather than saw the guard hesitate, then move away, thinking she'd fainted from fear. Through slitted eyes, she watched the choreography unfold. The bandits fired enough to make it convincing, but aimed to miss. The guards surrendered quickly. Jenkins stepped forward, hands raised, speaking to the lead rider. "We've done our part," he was saying. "She's by the second wagon, probably passed out from fright." The leader, a tall man with ice-blue eyes visible above his bandana, dismounted. "Search her. Make sure she's not armed." 2 bandits approached Clara's prone form. She made a split-second decision, reaching for the vial of laudanum. A small amount on her lips, her breath deliberately shallow, it would buy her time. Rough hands rolled her over, patted her down. The dress's design concealed the revolver, but just barely. One of the men found her small knife. "Just this," he reported, holding it up. "Check her pulse," the leader ordered. Clara slowed her breathing further as fingers pressed against her neck. "She's alive, just out cold." "Finish it then. Make it look right." Clara fought to remain still as a revolver pressed against her side. The report was deafening, the pain immediate and searing as the bullet grazed her ribs. Blood bloomed across her black dress, nearly invisible against the dark fabric. "She's done," the man said, standing. "Wagon's all yours, Vaughn." Clara lay motionless, focusing on the pain to stay conscious. Through blood loss and encroaching shock, she watched as they dragged Thomas's coffin from the wagon, laughing as they pried it open. One spat on the body inside. "Told you it was him," Jenkins said to the leader, Vaughn. "Had to be sure," Vaughn replied, his voice coldly efficient. "Boss wants confirmation." Clara committed his voice to memory, along with every face she could see. "What about her?" one of the other bandits asked, gesturing toward Clara. "Leave her," Vaughn ordered. "Animals will finish her by morning." The bandits ransacked the wagons, taking supplies and valuables. They herded the drivers and guards away at gunpoint, though Clara noted there was none of the fear expected from captives. Accomplices, all of them. Only when the sounds of horses and men had faded completely did Clara allow herself to move. The pain was breathtaking, but the bullet had only grazed her side, tearing flesh but breaking no bones. She'd suffered worse. Night fell as she dragged herself to the abandoned wagon. The bandits had taken everything useful, water-food weapons. They'd left Thomas's body, though sprawled undignified beside his broken coffin. "I'm sorry," she whispered, kneeling beside him. With trembling hands, she arranged his limbs, closed his eyes, and covered him with his own suit jacket. Clara worked methodically through the night, fighting pain and blood loss. First, she tore strips from her petticoat for bandages, packing the wound as she'd been taught in field hospitals. Next, she searched every inch of the abandoned wagons: a forgotten canteen with an inch of water, a box of matches, a broken harness that could be repurposed. By dawn, she had fashioned a crude shelter by draping the wagon canvas over a rocky outcropping. Her side throbbed with each heartbeat, but the bleeding had slowed. She'd buried Thomas as best she could with a makeshift shovel crafted from wagon debris. It wasn't deep enough to keep scavengers away for long, but it was the best she could manage. Clara stared at the mound of stones marking his grave, something cold and terrible taking shape in her heart. She'd left that life behind, the killing, the calculated violence. She'd promised Thomas, had promised herself. But Thomas was dead, and his killers were riding free. With methodical precision born of years of training, Clara slaughtered one of the abandoned horses. The animal had been hamstrung by the bandits and left to die slowly. Clara's knife was mercy. From the carcass she harvested what she needed: sinew for cordage, bones for tools, hide for water carrying. By midday she had constructed a bow from a flexible wagon slat and horsehair. The old skills returned with frightening ease, muscle memory untouched by 7 years of civilian life. Arrow shafts from straight branches, fletchings from the feathers of a carrion bird, a water skin from the horse's bladder. As the sun climbed higher, Clara stood atop the ravine surveying the land below. Hoof prints led northwest toward the mountains, at least 10 riders moving unhurried, confident. Her side burned with infection beginning to set in, but Clara had endured septic wounds before. She knew the plants that would help: desert sage to pack the wound, yucca root to chew for pain. She fashioned a travois to drag her meager supplies and began walking. That night Clara dreamed of her son. William had his father's eyes, a man Clara had loved briefly during the war, dead before the boy's birth. William had been 5 when he died, caught in the crossfire of an ambush meant for the supply caravan Colonel Grant had rerouted without warning the escorting soldiers. In her dream, William asked why she'd never returned for him, why she'd left him in her sister's care while she went back to war. Clara woke, gasping, the familiar guilt like a stone in her throat. By the 3rd day of tracking, Clara had fallen into the rhythm of her former life. 10 miles before noon, rest during the hottest hours, 10 more miles before making camp at dusk. The bandits were moving toward an abandoned mining settlement according to the tracks. They weren't bothering to conceal their trail, another sign of confidence or arrogance. On the 4th day she found their first camp. They'd left in a hurry that morning, leaving embers still warm. Clara scavenged what she could: a discarded knife better than her own, a half-empty bottle of whiskey useful for disinfecting her wound, a crumpled sheet of paper burned at one edge. She carefully smoothed the paper, revealing part of a map with annotations in a neat military hand. One location was circled Devil's Backbone, an old army outpost that had been decommissioned after the border was redrawn. Clara knew it well. She'd trained there, had led missions from its fortified walls. So this was no random attack, no opportunistic banditry. Someone with military connections wanted Thomas dead, or rather wanted confirmation that Thomas was dead, and they'd chosen Devil's Backbone as their rendezvous point. Clara's blood ran cold as the implication hit her. Thomas hadn't been the target at all. She had. Someone knew who she really was, knew about her past, knew she'd married a postal carrier named Thomas Maddox. She thought of how the bandits had opened Thomas's coffin as if confirming the identity of the corpse. Had they been expecting to find her? Had Thomas died because someone thought he was harboring Scout Sergeant Clara Blackwood? That night Clara allowed herself one moment of weakness. She wept silently, shoulders shaking as she remembered Thomas's smile, his patience, the quiet life they'd built. He'd deserved better than to die for her sins. By morning, grief had crystallized into resolve. Clara Maddox, widow victim, was a role she could no longer play. The woman who emerged from the crude shelter with the rising sun was Scout Sergeant Blackwood, stripped of insignia, but not of purpose. She buried her wedding ring beneath a distinctive stone formation. If she survived, she would return for it. If not, it would remain with the last piece of the woman she'd tried to become. The bandits' trail led higher into the mountains through terrain that grew increasingly familiar to Clara. This had been her hunting ground during the border conflicts, every ravine, every pass known to her from countless scouting missions. They were heading toward Devil's Backbone, sure enough, but they'd need to stop again before reaching it. The journey was too long for a single push, especially with their unhurried pace. Clara circled wide, pushing her body to its limits to get ahead of them. She knew where they would likely camp, a sheltered basin with a reliable spring, the only water source for miles. If she could reach it first, she could set the stage for her first strike. The basin appeared just as the sun began its descent, a green oasis nestled between rocky slopes. Clara worked quickly, efficiently. First, she located the spring and collected enough water for 2 days, storing it in her makeshift containers. Then she contaminated the spring with a particular combination of plants that would cause severe intestinal distress, not fatal, but debilitating. Next, she set perimeter alarms, thin cordage strung with small objects that would rattle if disturbed. An old scout trick, effective despite its simplicity. Finally, she established a position on high ground with multiple escape routes, concealing herself among the rocks with the patience of a predator. Night fell. The desert cold seeped into Clara's bones, but she remained motionless, conserving energy. Her side still throbbed, but the infection had responded to the herbal poultices she'd applied. She would survive it as she had survived worse. The bandits arrived shortly after midnight, the glow of their torches visible long before the sound of horses reached Clara's position. She counted 11 men, 10 bandits, plus Jenkins. They made camp with the efficiency of those accustomed to life on the trail, though Clara noted with professional disapproval how they positioned their sentries. Sloppy, overconfident. She watched as they drank from the spring, as they set up their bedrolls, as they built a fire too large for safety. She memorized their positions, identified the leader, Vaughn, still wearing the same distinctive gun belt with silver conchos, and noted which men kept to themselves and which clustered together. 2 hours later, the first groans began as the contaminated water took effect. Men staggered from their bedrolls, clutching their stomachs. The camp descended into miserable chaos as bandit after bandit succumbed. Clara moved then, silent as a ghost. She approached from downwind, staying low, using the shadows cast by their own fire against them. The first sentry was easy, doubled over in pain. He never saw the garrote that ended his watch permanently. Clara dragged his body into the darkness, took his revolver and ammunition. The second sentry proved more challenging. He'd positioned himself away from the spring, had drunk from his own canteen. Alert and armed with a Winchester repeater, he scanned the perimeter with professional diligence. Clara circled behind him, using small noises to draw his attention in the wrong direction. When he turned to investigate a deliberately dislodged stone, she closed the distance in 3 silent strides and drove her knife into the base of his skull. A swift, merciful death, more than he deserved, but Clara wasn't interested in prolonging suffering, just ending threats. 2 down, 9 to go. She could have killed more that night. The entire camp was vulnerable, half the men incapacitated by her poisoned spring. But Clara had been a soldier, not an assassin. Even in her darkest missions, she'd operated with a code. She wouldn't slaughter sick men in their bedrolls no matter what they'd done. Instead, she took what she needed: ammunition, a proper canteen, dried meat, a compass, and most importantly, a Henry rifle one of the sentries had left propped against a rock. She also retrieved a saddlebag containing papers, perhaps more maps or orders, that could reveal who was behind this. As she prepared to withdraw, Clara noticed something unexpected: a small prison wagon at the edge of the camp, the kind used to transport individual prisoners. At first she thought it empty, but then saw movement inside. A child from the size, a boy no more than 10 years old. Clara hesitated, her escape plan suddenly complicated. She hadn't anticipated hostages or captives. The boy might be leverage, a kidnap victim, or even bait, but she couldn't leave a child in the hands of men who killed without compunction. She approached the cage wagon, cautiously keeping to the shadows. The boy saw her before she could speak, his eyes widening in the darkness. "Are you here to kill them?" he whispered, fingers curling around the iron bars. Clara assessed him quickly, thin, dark-haired, with bruises visible on his forearms, not a willing companion to these men. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Who are you?" "Samuel," he said. "They took me from the mission school, said my pa paid them, but I don't have a pa." Clara's jaw tightened. "Can you ride?" The boy nodded. "If I free you, can you make your way to Bennett's Crossing? It's 2 days east." Samuel's face fell. "They'll catch me. They always do." Clara made a swift decision. "Wait here. Be silent." She returned to the camp where most of the bandits were still in the throes of illness. She located Jenkins curled on his side near the fire face, contorted in pain. Clara dragged him into the shadows by his collar, pressed her recovered revolver to his temple. "The boy," she hissed. "What's his purpose?" Jenkins's eyes widened in shock and recognition. You're supposed to be dead. Answer me or you will be." "Insurance," Jenkins gasped. "Against you." Clara's blood ran cold. "Explain." "They knew you were dangerous. The boy is to make sure you don't attack the main force." Jenkins groaned, clutching his stomach. "Please. Water." "Who hired you?" Clara pressed the gun harder against his temple. "Don't know. Vaughn handles the contracts. Said this one came from high up, military high up." Clara's mind raced. Military connections. Devil's backbone. A targeted attack meant to confirm her death. "Colonel Grant," she said, watching Jenkins's face. The flicker of recognition told her everything. "He's been looking for you," Jenkins confirmed. 5 years now. Said you had something of his. Said you needed to be silenced." Clara thought of the documents that had proven Grant's treachery, his sale of intelligence to both sides during the border conflicts, his deliberate misdirection of troops that had resulted in dozens of casualties, including her son. Documents she'd hidden away as insurance when she'd disappeared. "The boy?" she demanded. "How does Grant know about him?" Jenkins winced. "Don't know any Grant. Vaughn just said the boss knew you had a weakness for children, after what happened to yours." The casual cruelty of it struck Clara like a physical blow. They'd taken a random orphan knowing the memory of her son would prevent her from acting rashly if the boy was threatened. They'd been right. Clara struck Jenkins with the butt of her revolver, rendering him unconscious. She dragged him to the prison wagon. "Samuel," she said quietly, "I'm going to free you, but we need to make it look like you're still captive." She gestured to Jenkins's unconscious form. "I'll put him in your place." The boy's eyes widened. "They'll kill him when they find out." "Yes," Clara replied. "They will." Samuel considered this, then nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Escape. Hide. Make your way to Bennett's Crossing. Ask for Dr. Howard Chambers. Tell him Scout Sergeant Blackwood sent you." "Scout Sergeant Blackwood," Samuel repeated. "But who are you really?" Clara unlocked the cage with keys taken from Jenkins's belt. "Someone who should have died a long time ago." As Samuel slipped away into the night, Clara secured Jenkins in the cage, gagged, to prevent him raising an alarm when he woke. She left the key just out of his reach, a cruel but necessary precaution. His companions might free him, or they might not, depending on how they valued loyalty against expediency. She had no illusions about these men. If Jenkins had outlived his usefulness, they'd leave him to die in that cage. As she made her final preparations to withdraw, Clara spotted a leather-bound journal among Jenkins's belongings. She took it along with a pencil, a luxury she hadn't expected to find. In the pre-dawn hours, safely hidden in a cave 2 miles from the bandits' camp, Clara examined her spoils by the light of a tiny shielded candle. The journal contained detailed notes, routes, payments, contacts. Jenkins had been thorough in his record-keeping, a fact that would now serve Clara's purpose. On the final page she found what she sought: confirmation that Colonel Elias Grant was indeed behind the ambush, though Jenkins had only ever dealt with intermediaries. The ultimate goal was retrieval of documents Clara had hidden, proving Grant's treasonous activities during the border conflicts. Clara tore out the relevant pages and tucked them into her boot. Then she opened to a fresh page and began to write. "Thomas," she began, "I failed to protect you in life. I will not fail in death. Each man who had a hand in your murder will answer for it. And when they are gone, perhaps I can join you with some measure of honor restored. Forgive me for returning to the person I once was. There is no other way." As dawn broke over the mountain, Clara closed the journal and concealed it beneath a distinctive rock formation. If she fell, someone might find it, might understand why she had done what she must do. The bandits would be recovering from their night of misery. They would find their 2 comrades dead, Jenkins imprisoned, the boy gone. They would know they were being hunted. Good. Let them feel what it was to be prey. Clara checked her weapons, adjusted the makeshift bandage on her side, and began moving north. The next phase would require more than improvised tools and desperate measures. She needed proper supplies, and she knew exactly where to find them. 10 miles away stood Copper Springs, once a thriving mining town, now little more than a dusty outpost serving travelers along the old military road. And in Copper Springs was someone who knew Clara Blackwood well, someone who owed her a debt, someone who might still have access to the weapons and information she would need to take on Elias Grant and his mercenaries. As Clara crested the ridge overlooking the bandits' camp, she paused for one final look. In the growing light she could see figures moving frantically, could imagine their confusion and fear. She felt a grim satisfaction but no pleasure. This wasn't vengeance, not yet. Just preparation. "I'm coming for you, Elias," she whispered to the wind. "For Thomas, for William, for all of us you sacrificed." Then she turned away, became one with the landscape, a ghost on the hunt. Copper Springs wheezed like a dying man. Once a bustling mining settlement, it had contracted to a handful of weathered buildings that leaned against each other as if for support. A general store, a saloon, a livery stable, and the squat, fortified structure that had once served as a field hospital during the border conflicts. Clara approached cautiously, using the terrain to remain hidden until she reached the outskirts. She'd abandoned her tattered mourning dress days ago, fashioning more practical attire from the clothing she'd taken from the dead bandits. With her hair cropped short and her face weathered by sun and hardship, she doubted anyone would connect her to the widow who had passed through the region with her husband's coffin. No one except Esther Campbell. The former Army nurse had known Clara during her service years, had saved her life twice, and kept her secrets more times than Clara could count. After the wars, Esther had settled in Copper Springs, turning the decommissioned field hospital into a clinic serving the scattered population of the territory. Clara circled the town, noting the few horses tied outside the saloon, the lack of activity at the livery. Mid-afternoon meant most residents would be indoors, sheltering from the punishing sun. Good. Fewer eyes to mark her passage. She approached the clinic from behind, scaling the low wall that enclosed a small garden of medicinal herbs. A clothesline stretched from the building to a gnarled mesquite tree sheets flapping in the hot breeze. Clara ducked beneath them, reached the back door, and paused, listening. Nothing but the creak of the building settling in the heat. She knocked softly, 3 short taps, a pause, 2 more. Their old signal. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a tall woman in her 50s, iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Esther Campbell's face showed no surprise, only a weary resignation. "Took you long enough?" she said, stepping aside to let Clara enter. "I heard about the ambush 3 days ago." Clara moved past her into the dim interior. "Word travels fast. Riders came through asking questions. Described a woman matching your description. Said she'd killed 2 men and kidnapped a child. The boy escaped. I helped." Clara surveyed the room, part living quarters, part medical office. "The men deserved killing." Esther closed and bolted the door. "Still direct, I see." She gestured toward a chair. "Sit before you fall. You're favoring your right side." Clara complied, lowering herself gingerly. "Bullet graze. Started to fester, but I found shepherd's purse and yarrow." "Let me see." There was no arguing with Esther when she used that tone. Clara unwrapped the crude bandage, revealing an angry red wound along her ribs. Esther clicked her tongue. "Not your finest field medicine." She moved to a cabinet, retrieving bandages and tinctures. "Why are you here, Clara? After all these years of hiding, why resurface now?" "Thomas is dead." "I know. I'm sorry." Esther began cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "He seemed like a good man the few times you brought him through town." Clara winced as antiseptic bit into raw flesh. "He was. Better than I deserved. And now you're hunting the men who killed him." It wasn't a question. "I'm hunting Elias Grant." Esther's hands stilled for a moment. "Colonel Grant. He's a general now, based at Fort Concho. He's a traitor who sold intelligence to the enemy. Got my son killed. Dozens of others." Clara met Esther's gaze directly. "He orchestrated Thomas's death to flush me out, to silence me permanently. Because you have proof of his treachery." "Yes." Esther resumed her ministrations, wrapping Clara's torso with fresh bandages. "So this isn't just about Thomas. It's about all of it. Everything I've lost. Everyone Grant has sacrificed for his ambitions." Clara's voice hardened. "I walked away once, left it all behind. He could have let me be." "Men like Grant don't leave loose ends." Esther secured the bandage. "Especially ones that could end their careers or worse. That's why I need your help. One last time." Esther wiped her hands on a cloth, her expression unreadable. "What exactly do you need?" "Weapons, ammunition, information about Grant's movements." Clara leaned forward. "And access to the old supply cache we maintained here." During the border conflicts, Clara's scout unit had established hidden caches throughout the territory. Weapons, medicine, and other necessities for when they operated behind enemy lines. The largest had been beneath the Copper Springs Field Hospital, accessible through a concealed trapdoor in the storage room. Esther hesitated, something flashing in her eyes that Clara couldn't quite interpret. "That cache was emptied years ago. Official order from Fort Concho. Everything, nearly everything. I kept a few items, for emergencies." Esther seemed to come to a decision. "Come with me." She led Clara through the clinic to a small storeroom lined with shelves of medical supplies. Kneeling, Esther pulled aside a worn rug, revealing a trapdoor set into the plank floor. It opened silently on well-oiled hinges. "I maintain it," she explained, descending the narrow steps into darkness. "Old habits." Clara followed, inhaling the familiar smell of gun oil and leather. Esther struck a match, lit a lantern, revealing a space much smaller than Clara remembered. A weapons trunk, a medical kit, a shelf of preserved food. Not the comprehensive arsenal of Clara's memory, but enough. "This will do," Clara said, kneeling beside the trunk. Inside, she found 2 Remington revolvers, a Winchester rifle, and several boxes of ammunition. "Thank you, Esther." "Don't thank me yet." Esther's voice had changed, grown tight. "There's something you should know." Clara looked up sharply, hand instinctively moving toward one of the revolvers. "What?" "Grant knows you're alive, has known for years." Esther wouldn't meet her eyes. He sent men to verify Thomas's death, but it was just confirmation of what he already suspected. How could he know? Clara stood slowly, suspicion blooming like her infected wound. I was careful, changed my name, moved territories. He had informants everywhere, looking for a woman with your particular skills. Esther finally looked at her eyes haunted. I told him you were alive, 3 years ago. The betrayal hit Clara like a physical blow. You what? My son Daniel. You remember him? Clara nodded stiffly. Daniel Campbell had been 16 when Clara last saw him, a bright, promising boy Esther had raised alone after her husband died in the same campaign that had revealed Clara's identity. He's sick, consumption, needs expensive treatments only available back east. Esther's face was a mask of shame and defiance. Grant approached me personally, said he'd heard rumors I might know your whereabouts, offered money enough for Daniel's care if I'd confirm you were alive. So you sold me. Clara's voice was ice. I told him you'd married a postal carrier named Maddox, that you lived quietly, that you had no interest in exposing his past crimes. Esther spread her hands. He promised he'd leave you alone if you remained silent. I believed him. Clara laughed a harsh, brittle sound. And you call yourself intelligent. She gestured upward toward the world above. Thomas is dead because you trusted a snake. I know. Tears spilled down Esther's weathered cheeks. When I heard about the ambush, I knew. He never intended to let you live. Clara turned away, trying to master the rage that threatened to consume her. This woman had been like a sister to her once, had saved her life, had kept her secrets, and had betrayed her utterly. Where is Daniel now? She asked finally. St. Louis, in a sanatorium. Esther wiped her tears with the back of her hand. The money Grant paid bought him 2 years of treatment. He's improving. Clara nodded once, processing this. Does Grant know I survived the ambush? Not from me. But riders have been through town asking questions. They left yesterday heading north toward Devil's Backbone. So they're gathering there as I suspected. Clara began selecting weapons from the trunk, the Winchester, both Remington's ammunition for all three. These mercenaries, did you recognize any of them? Esther hesitated. One, Jonah. Clara froze. Jonah Reeves. The same. Cold dread pooled in Clara's stomach. Jonah Reeves had been part of her scout unit, a tracker nearly as skilled as she was, with a perfect memory for terrain and a talent for silent killing. He'd also been unstable, prone to excessive violence. Clara had requested his transfer after finding him mutilating the bodies of enemies they'd ambushed. He should be dead, Clara said. Last I heard, he'd been court-martialed for killing a superior officer. Escaped before they could hang him. Became a bounty hunter. Esther shook her head. He's dangerous, Clara. Worse than before. I'm counting on it. Clara continued gathering supplies, a hunting knife wire for snares, waterproof matches. Jonah was always predictable in his unpredictability. Makes him easier to manipulate. You can't fight them all, Clara. Grant has resources men at his command. I don't plan to fight them all at once. Clara examined a stick of dynamite she'd found in the trunk, nodded in satisfaction. I'll dismantle his operation piece by piece, make him watch as everything he's built crumbles. Then when he's alone and desperate, I'll confront him. And then, Clara met Esther's gaze, then I'll decide whether to kill him or let the law have him. The law won't touch a general without overwhelming evidence. I have evidence, hidden where no one will find it unless I don't return. Clara closed the weapons trunk. Which brings me to the next thing I need from you. Name it. If I don't come back within 2 weeks, I need you to retrieve something for me. Clara described the location of the journal she'd hidden, the rock formation that marked it. Inside is my account of Grant's treachery, along with references to where the supporting documents are hidden. Take it to Judge Williams in Santa Fe. He'll know what to do. Esther nodded solemnly. And if you do come back, then I'll deliver it myself with Grant in chains beside me. Clara gathered her chosen supplies into a saddlebag. "I need one more thing. A horse." "Take mine. Bay mare behind the clinic. She's strong and sure-footed in mountain terrain." "Thank you." Clara hesitated, the betrayal still a raw wound between them. "Why are you helping me now after what you did?" Esther's face crumpled. "Because I owe you this much at least. Because my son's life doesn't outweigh the others that were lost. And because Grant lied to me, promised he only wanted to confirm you weren't a threat." "He won't stop with me," Clara warned. "Once I'm gone, you're a loose end too." "I know." Esther reached into a pocket, withdrew a small key. "That's why I've made arrangements. Daniel is almost recovered. Once he's strong enough, we're leaving. Heading to California." She pressed the key into Clara's hand. "This opens a lockbox at the Wells Fargo office in Santa Fe. Inside is money, my savings, plus what remains of Grant's blood money. Use it if you need to." Clara closed her fingers around the key, nodded once. "If I succeed, Grant will face justice. If you fail, I'll make sure the truth comes out. For Thomas, for your son, for all of them." Clara gathered her supplies and followed Esther back up the stairs. They moved through the clinic in silence, the weight of history and betrayal heavy between them. At the back door, Esther handed Clara a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Food for the journey, medicine for your wound." Clara took it with a nod. 2 weeks, Esther. If I haven't returned by then, assume I've failed." "Clara," Esther's voice broke. "I'm sorry. For all of it." "So am I." Clara stepped through the door into the hard afternoon light. "Tell Daniel I wish him well." Without looking back, she moved through the garden to where Esther's mare was tethered. The horse regarded her with intelligent eyes, nostrils flaring slightly at the unfamiliar scent. Clara offered her palm, let the animal catch her scent, then checked the saddle and bridle with practiced hands. As she mounted, Clara scanned the town once more. Still quiet, no sign her presence had been noted. She turned the horse north toward the mountains, toward Devil's Backbone, toward the reckoning that had been 7 years in the making. The first night after leaving Copper Springs, Clara made camp in a sheltered arroyo hidden from casual observation by the twisting terrain. As twilight deepened into true darkness, she tended to her horse, ate sparingly of Esther's provisions, and cleaned her newly acquired weapons. The betrayal still stung, but Clara found she couldn't hate Esther. In her position, faced with her son's suffering, Clara might have made the same choice. Hadn't she abandoned her own principles, her own identity to protect Thomas? Hadn't she killed without hesitation when he was taken from her? Love made traitors of them all in the end. Clara unfolded the map she'd found among Jenkins's belongings, studied it by lantern light. Devil's Backbone lay 2 days' ride to the north, assuming good weather and no pursuit. The old military outpost occupied a commanding position atop a ridge with sight lines extending for miles in all directions. A frontal assault would be suicide. But Clara had never favored frontal assaults. She traced alternate routes with her finger-game trails, dried creek beds, narrow ravines. Approaches that wouldn't appear on standard military maps. She knew that terrain intimately, had spent years traversing it as part of her scouting duties. If Grant had chosen Devil's Backbone as his base, he'd done so confident in its defensive advantages. Advantages that meant nothing against someone who knew the land as Clara did. She folded the map and extinguished the lantern. Sleep came in fragments, as it always did, combat instincts too deeply ingrained to allow true rest in hostile territory. Each sound, each shift in the wind, brought her to wakefulness, hand moving automatically to the Remington beside her bedroll. Dawn found her already mounted, moving through the landscape like a shadow. She kept to low ground, using the terrain to remain hidden from any watchers on the ridgelines. The mare proved as sure-footed as Esther had promised, navigating the rocky terrain without complaint. By mid-morning, Clara spotted the first scout, a lone rider on a distant rise rifle across his saddle, scanning the approaches to Devil's Backbone. She noted his position, avoided his line of sight. Amateur. A proper perimeter would have pairs of scouts, not isolated sentries. Unless this one was simply bait meant to be spotted, meant to draw her into a trap. Clara diverted course cutting west through a series of shallow canyons. If Grant had established a proper defensive perimeter, she would find its edges probed for weaknesses. She found the patrol near noon, 3 riders moving in a loose formation along a ridge, checking washes and ravines methodically. More professional than the lone scout. Clara observed them from concealment, noting their weapons, their level of alertness. Not Vaughn's bandits. These men moved with military precision, maintained proper spacing, kept their weapons ready. Soldiers or former soldiers. Grant was upgrading his security, which meant he knew she was coming. Clara retreated, found another route. No direct confrontation, not yet. First, she needed to understand the full scope of what she faced. By late afternoon, she'd identified 3 patrol routes, 2 fixed observation posts, and a supply line running southeast toward Fort Concho. Grant had established a surprisingly robust operation at Devil's Backbone, far more than would be needed to deal with one vengeful widow. Something larger was at stake, something that would justify a general risking his reputation by occupying an abandoned outpost with what appeared to be private mercenaries supplemented by actual soldiers. As dusk approached, Clara found a vantage point that offered a clear view of Devil's Backbone itself. The outpost stood silhouetted against the darkening skylights, winking from windows that had been dark for years. Through her field glass she could make out figures moving on the walls, the glint of rifle barrels in the last rays of sunlight. At least 20 men, possibly more, inside the structures. Too many for her to eliminate alone, even with surprise on her side. She would need to thin their numbers, divide their attention. Lowering the glass, Clara considered her options. A direct assault was impossible. Infiltration unlikely given the observers on the walls, but if she could draw out smaller groups, engage them on her terms. A plan began to take shape. Not elegant, but practical. Grant expected her to come for him, expected a frontal attack driven by rage and grief. She would give him something else entirely. Clara made camp well away from her observation point in a narrow fissure that offered protection from the wind and concealment from searchers. As she prepared a cold meal, she heard it, the distant whinny of a horse quickly stifled. She wasn't alone. Moving silently, Clara extinguished her small fire, gathered her weapons. The sound had come from the east, perhaps 300 yards distant. Downwind, which meant whoever was out there hadn't caught her scent or her horses. Using the deepening shadows for cover, Clara worked her way toward the source of the sound. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, loose scree threatening to betray her position with every step. She moved slowly, testing each foothold, rifle ready. The rider had made camp in a small depression, a natural hollow that offered limited protection from observation. A tactical choice, but not an inspired one. Clara approached from above, using an outcropping of rock for concealment. In the faint starlight, she could make out the figure of a man tending a tiny, carefully shielded fire. His horse was picketed nearby, a sturdy Mustang that shifted nervously, perhaps sensing Clara's presence. She studied the man, noted the carbine leaning against a saddle, the revolver at his hip. His movements were efficient, practiced a man accustomed to life in wild country. Not one of the military patrols she'd observed earlier. A scout, perhaps, or a bounty hunter. Clara had a clear shot from her position. One bullet, and this potential threat would be eliminated. But a gunshot would carry in the still night air, might alert others nearby. And she needed information more than she needed another dead body on her conscience. She circled the camp, approaching from the direction the horse was facing. Animals were better sentries than humans. The Mustang would detect her scent, would alert its master. Clara counted on this, used it. As expected, the horse's head came up, nostrils flaring. It sidestepped nervously, tugging at its picket. The man stood alert instantly. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the horse hand, dropping to his revolver. Clara stepped into the faint circle of firelight, rifle trained on the man's chest. "Don't," she said quietly. He froze, hand hovering above his weapon. "Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am." "Keep your hands where I can see them. Turn around slowly." He complied, turning to face her fully. In the dim light, Clara saw a weathered face beneath a brush of gray hair. Late 50s, perhaps older. Deep lines around the eyes suggested years squinting into harsh sunlight. "You must be the widow," he said, voice gravelly with age or hard living. "They said you was dangerous." "They were right." Clara kept the rifle steady. "Who are you?" "Name's Murchison. Tracker." "Who hired you, Murchison?" A slight hesitation. "Man who calls himself Vaughn. Paid good money to find one Clara Maddox, formerly known as—" "I know who I was," Clara interrupted. "You're working for Elias Grant." Murchison shrugged. "Don't know no Grant. Vaughn pays my fee, gives me a description I track. Simple business." "And when you find me, then what?" "Signal the nearest patrol. They handle the rest." Murchison's eyes never left the rifle. "That was the arrangement." "How did you find me?" "Been following your trail since Copper Springs. You're good, ma'am, but you're leaving signs. Broken twigs, disturbed stones." He gestured vaguely eastward. "And that nurse, she ain't as loyal as you might think. Told me which way you was headed soon as I showed her the color of my money." Clara's stomach clenched. Esther betraying her again, or perhaps being strategic, sending Murchison in the wrong direction, buying Clara time. "Did she now?" Clara said flatly. "Also mentioned you used to be quite the scout. Said I should watch my back." Murchison allowed himself a tight smile. "Seems she was right about that at least." "How many others are looking for me?" "Don't rightly know. I work alone." Clara studied him, weighing his words against his demeanor. He seemed to be telling the truth, or at least what he believed to be the truth. "The boy," she said, "the one they had in the cage. Where is he?" Murchison's brow furrowed. "What boy?" "Samuel, from the mission school." "Lady, I don't know nothing about no boy or no cage. I was hired 3 days ago in Copper Springs. Anything before that ain't my business." Clara considered this. If Murchison didn't know about Samuel, perhaps the boy had indeed escaped, had made it to Bennett's Crossing as she'd instructed, or perhaps he'd been recaptured by another group, was being held at Devil's Backbone even now. "Vaughn," she said, "describe him." "Tall fella, blue eyes, dresses better than most in these parts, carries a Colt Navy with pearl grips. Man who enjoys killing, if you take my meaning." The description matched the leader of the ambush party. Clara nodded slightly. "I'm going to make you an offer, Murchison," she said. "One chance only." "I'm listening." "Ride away, tonight. Keep riding until you're out of the territory. Tell anyone who asks that you lost my trail." She tightened her grip on the rifle. "Do that, and you live." Murchison considered this, eyes calculating. "And if I refuse, then I bury you here, and your horse gets a new owner." He nodded slowly. "Seems a fair offer, but I got a counter. I'm not negotiating. Hear me out, ma'am. I've been tracking 40 years. Ain't never lost a quarry yet. My reputation means something." Murchison gestured to his meager camp. "I can help you more alive than dead." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Explain." "I know where the patrols are, know their schedules, know the passwords they use. Could be useful to someone planning what you're planning." "And why would you betray your employer?" "Business is business. Vaughn paid half up front, half on delivery. Way I see it, that first half is earned already. I found you." Murchison shrugged again. "Question is, who pays better for the second half, Vaughn or you?" Clara almost laughed at the man's pragmatism. "I don't have much money." "Didn't figure you did, but you got something better." He nodded toward her rifle. "You got a chance at surviving this mess. I'd like a piece of that chance. You're suggesting an alliance. Call it what you want. I call it improving my odds." Murchison spread his hands. "Way I figure it, Vaughn's men catch you, they got no more need for an old tracker. Might even see me as a liability, knowing what I know." Clara considered his words. He wasn't wrong. Men like Vaughn rarely left loose ends, and an experienced tracker who knew the patrol routes could be invaluable, if he could be trusted. "Why should I believe you won't signal the nearest patrol the moment I lower this rifle?" "Because I'd be dead before their dust appeared on the horizon, and we both know it." Murchison met her gaze steadily. "I'm old, ma'am, but I ain't stupid. I can recognize when the winds have shifted." Clara made her decision. "Your weapons. Unload them. Now." Murchison complied without protest, removing the cylinder from his revolver, ejecting the shells from his carbine. "Ammunition in your saddlebags, too," Clara directed. He retrieved several boxes of shells, placed them on the ground. "Now back away, over there." She gestured with the rifle barrel. When Murchison had retreated to a safe distance, Clara gathered his ammunition, secured it in her own saddlebags. She left his weapons unloaded but within reach, a calculated risk. If he truly meant to ally with her, he would need to defend himself eventually. "Here's how this works," she said, lowering her rifle slightly. "You tell me everything you know about Grant's operation. Patrol routes, passwords, numbers. I verify what I can. If your information proves accurate, you get your ammunition back and we discuss next steps. If not—" She left the threat unspoken. Murchison nodded. "Fair enough, though I still don't know no Grant. Vaughn's the only name I got." "Tell me about Vaughn, then. Everything." As the night deepened around them, Murchison laid out what he knew: 12-man patrols operating in a 5-mile radius of Devil's Backbone. Passwords changing daily based on a system of playing cards. Supply wagons arriving every third day from Fort Concho under military escort. Most valuable of all, he confirmed what Clara had already suspected. General Elias Grant himself was expected to arrive at Devil's Backbone within the week, ostensibly for an inspection tour, but actually to oversee some operation Murchison wasn't privy to. "They're bringing in crates," Murchison said. "Heavy ones. Takes 4 men to carry each. Whatever's inside, they handle it careful-like." "Weapons," Clara suggested. "Maybe. Or something else valuable. Guards double when those wagons come through." Clara thought of the border conflicts of the intelligence Grant had sold to both sides. Perhaps he was still in the business of betrayal, using Devil's Backbone as a base for operations too illegal to conduct at Fort Concho. "These crates," she pressed. "Where do they store them?" "Underground. Old powder magazine beneath the main building. Only Vaughn and a couple others allowed down there." Clara nodded, adding this to her mental map of the outpost. The powder magazine had been expanded during her time at Devil's Backbone, converted to secure storage for sensitive documents and equipment. If Grant was using it again, the contents must be significant. "One more thing," Murchison added. "There's talk of a special guest arriving with the general. Someone important. They've been fixing up the commander's quarters all week." "Did you hear a name?" "No. But whoever it is got the men nervous. Extra security, extra supplies." Murchison scratched his stubbled chin. "Something big's brewing, ma'am. Something worth a general risking his stars over." Clara absorbed this mind racing with implications. Grant wouldn't risk his career without substantial reward. Whatever he was planning at Devil's Backbone went beyond silencing one troublesome former scout. "Rest," she said, finally making a decision. "We move at first light." Murchison raised an eyebrow. Your information checks out with what I've observed, and I could use another set of eyes." Clara gestured to his empty weapons. "You'll get your ammunition back tomorrow if you're still decided on this course. And if I've changed my mind, then you ride away as I first suggested, without your ammunition." Murchison nodded, accepting the terms. "Fair enough." Clara retreated to the shadows, positioned herself where she could observe both Murchison and the surrounding terrain. She didn't expect sleep, too many variables, too many risks, but she allowed herself short periods of rest, never more than 20 minutes at a time, always waking alert and oriented. By dawn, she'd made her plan. Not elegant, as she'd noted before, but practical. And now, with Murchison's intelligence, potentially effective. The tracker was already awake when she approached his camp, brewing coffee in a small tin pot. He nodded a greeting, offered a cup without speaking. Clara accepted it, the bitter warmth a welcome comfort after the cold night. "Still with me?" she asked, watching him over the rim of the cup. Murchison nodded. "Ain't got better prospects elsewhere." Clara reached into her saddlebags, retrieved 2 boxes of ammunition. "Enough for your immediate needs. The rest when we're done." He accepted them with a nod. Sensible. What's the plan? We're going to reduce their numbers, make them come to us in small groups away from the outpost. Clara sipped her coffee. Starting with the patrol that will pass 2 miles east of here at approximately 10 o'clock this morning. Murchison raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. Necessary. By my count, Grant has at least 30 men at Devil's Backbone. Too many for a direct assault even if I had a small army, which I don't. So we whittle them down. Precisely. Clara outlined her strategy: ambush. The patrol take their uniforms and credentials, use those to move closer to the outpost, gather intelligence, prepare for Grant's arrival. And then, Murchison asked, and then I finish what I started 7 years ago. Clara didn't elaborate, didn't need to. You can leave before that part if you'd prefer. Murchison studied her over his coffee. You really think you can take down a general of the United States Army? I think I can expose him for what he is. After that, the Army can handle the rest. Assuming you live to tell the tale. Clara met his gaze evenly. I've survived worse odds. They broke camp efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence. Murchison, Clara noted, was thorough in his woodcraft, another point in favor of his story. A man who covered his tracks so well would indeed be a skilled tracker. They rode east, keeping to low ground, avoiding the sight lines Clara had identified the previous day. Murchison offered occasional insights: a better route here, a hidden approach there. Useful knowledge freely given. Either he was genuinely committed to their alliance or building her trust for a later betrayal. Time would tell. The ambush position was a natural bottleneck, a dry streambed cutting through rocky terrain, forcing riders to proceed single file. Clara and Murchison concealed themselves among the boulders overlooking the passage, rifles ready. They'll have point riders checking for exactly this kind of trap, Murchison murmured as they settled into position. Yes, Clara acknowledged. That's why you're going to draw them in. Murchison glanced at her sharply. Am I now? You're known to them. Expected even. You signal that you've found my trail, they'll come eagerly. Clara met his gaze. Unless you'd prefer to remain hidden while I engage 6 armed men alone. The tracker snorted. And if I actually signal for help, rather than drawing them into your trap, then one of us dies today. Possibly both. Clara checked her rifle's action. Your choice, Murchison. He considered this, then nodded once. Signals a blue bandana tied to a branch. Means I found something worth investigating but not confirmed capture. Good enough. When they're in position, drop flat. I'll do the rest. Murchison moved to his assigned position while Clara settled deeper into her concealment. The waiting was familiar. The controlled breathing, the absolute stillness, the hyper-awareness of every sound and movement. She'd spent countless hours like this during the border conflicts, hunting or being hunted. The patrol appeared on schedule, 6 riders moving at a steady walk along the trail below. As Murchison had predicted, 2 rode ahead as scouts checking the terrain, alert for threats. The main group followed at a distance, rifles ready but not aimed. Clara watched through her field glass as Murchison made himself visible to the lead riders waving the blue bandana. They approached cautiously, hands near weapons. Words were exchanged that Clara couldn't hear. Murchison gestured toward the streambed, toward where Clara was hidden. One rider dispatched back to the main group. A brief conference. Then, as Clara had hoped, 4 of the 6 dismounted, handed their reins to the remaining 2, and began advancing on foot, following Murchison into the streambed. Perfect. The odds were improving already. Clara tracked the approaching men through her rifle sight. Standard military formation, but sloppy execution. They were bunched too closely, moving too confidently. They expected an unarmed widow, perhaps, or a clean surrender. They would receive neither. As the 4 men reached the narrowest part of the streambed directly beneath Clara's position, Murchison dropped flat as instructed. Clara took a deep breath, held it, squeezed the trigger. The first man fell without a sound. A neat hole punched through his forehead. Before the others could react, Clara worked the lever action and fired again. Second man down, clutching a throat, suddenly spouting blood. The remaining two scattered seeking cover among the boulders. One fired wildly in Clara's direction, bullets whining off stone several feet from her position. Amateur. He'd fired at movement, not a confirmed target. Clara shifted position, circling behind a large boulder, using the terrain to approach from their flank. Voices echoed among the rocks, panicked shouts, confused orders. "Jenkins, Rawlins, report." The two men with the horses, realizing something had gone wrong, were advancing cautiously, rifles ready. Clara needed to finish the foot patrol quickly if she wanted to maintain the advantage. Movement caught her eye, one of the soldiers attempting to climb to higher ground, likely hoping to spot her from above. She took careful aim, waited for him to reach an exposed position, fired. He tumbled down the rocky slope, rifle clattering away. 3 down, 1 more on foot, plus the 2 with the horses. Clara circled again, silent as a ghost among the rocks. Where was the 4th man? A scuff of boot on stone behind her. Clara dropped and rolled as a rifle barked, the bullet passing through the space she'd occupied a moment before. She came up, firing 2 quick shots that caught her attacker in the chest. He staggered backward, rifle dropping from nerveless fingers, and collapsed against a boulder. 4 down, 2 to go. The remaining riders had taken cover behind their horses, using the animals as shields. A coward's tactic, but effective. Clara wouldn't shoot an innocent horse, and they knew it. "Murchison," one of them called. "You old bastard, where are you?" Silence answered him. Clara smiled grimly. The tracker was proving his worth by staying out of the fight entirely. Smart man. She needed to change position again, find an angle that would give her a clear shot at the men without endangering the horses, but movement now would expose her to their fire. A distraction then. Reaching into her coat, Clara withdrew one of the sticks of dynamite she'd taken from Esther's cache. A dangerous solution, but an effective one. She struck a match, lit the fuse, and hurled the stick over the boulder toward where the horses were tethered. It landed short, as she'd intended, but the explosion that followed was enough. The horses reared in panic, breaking free of their restraints, bolting in all directions. The 2 soldiers, suddenly exposed, fired desperately toward where they thought Clara might be. She waited for their rifles to empty, for the inevitable pause as they reloaded. Then she rose, Remington in each hand, and fired. Both men fell. Silence descended on the ravine, broken only by the distant sounds of retreating horses and the ringing in Clara's ears from the dynamite blast. "Murchison," she called. "It's done." The tracker emerged cautiously from behind a large rock, surveying the carnage with a professional eye. "Efficient," he commented. "Though we've lost the horses. They'll circle back eventually. Trained military mounts." Clara moved among the fallen men, checking for survivors. None. She hadn't expected any. She'd been shooting to kill. 6 men who would never return to Devil's Backbone. 6 men whose absence would be noted. "Help me with the uniforms," she instructed Murchison. "We need to move quickly. Someone will have heard that explosion." They worked efficiently, stripping the dead men of uniforms, weapons, ammunition, and identification. Clara paid particular attention to insignia and patches, looking for anything that might indicate their unit or assignment. "Regular Army," she noted, examining a dispatch pouch taken from what appeared to be the patrol leader. "Not mercenaries like Vaughn's men." "Grant's personal detachment," Murchison confirmed, holding up a patch. "See that symbol assigned directly to Fort Concho Command." So Grant was using actual soldiers in his illegal operation. The stakes were rising. Clara opened the dispatch pouch, found written orders authorizing the patrol signed by Captain James Mercer, acting on behalf of General Grant. She pocketed them. Such documentation could prove useful if she needed to bluff her way past checkpoints. "Anything useful on your end?" she asked Murchison. "Ammunition, rations, canteens." He held up a folded document. "And this. Looks like patrol schedules for the next 3 days." Clara took it, scanned the neat columns of times and locations. "This is valuable. We'll avoid these routes, target the patrols when they're most isolated. If we keep dropping 6 men at a time, they'll change tactics," Murchison warned. "Might even pull back to the outpost, consolidate their forces." "Good. The more confined their movements, the easier it will be to observe them, learn their patterns." Clara folded the schedule, tucked it into her coat. We should move. Collect what you can carry, conceal the bodies as best we can. We need to be miles from here before the next patrol comes looking." They worked quickly, dragging the bodies into a narrow crevice, covering them with rocks and brush. Not a perfect solution, scavengers would find them eventually, but enough to buy time. As they prepared to leave, Clara heard the faint but distinctive sound of approaching riders. "Reinforcements," Murchison muttered. "Earlier than expected." Clara calculated distances, terrain features. "South ravine. If we move now, we can be clear before they arrive." They gathered their spoils, weapons, ammunition, documents, and retreated rapidly, leaving the horses to the newcomers. Clara felt a twinge of regret at the loss of Esther's mare, but the animal would be well treated by the army at least. Better than being shot in the conflict to come. As they made their way south, putting distance between themselves and the ambush site, Clara considered their next move. The patrol schedules provided an opportunity to systematically reduce Grant's forces, but time was limited. If Grant himself was arriving within the week, she needed to be positioned at Devil's Backbone before then. By late afternoon, they'd covered several miles, moving cross-country to avoid established trails. Clara called a halt when they reached a sheltered depression with good visibility of the surrounding terrain. "We need to divide these supplies," she said, laying out their captured equipment, "and discuss our next move." Murchison eyed the Remington she'd recovered from one of the dead soldiers. "Mind if I upgrade my sidearm?" Clara handed it to him along with a box of matching ammunition. A gesture of trust, carefully calculated. "You've earned it." He examined the weapon appreciatively. "Who taught you to shoot like that? 6 men, 6 shots?" "My father initially, then the army." Clara sorted through the captured documents, looking for anything that might provide insight into Grant's operations. "I had a natural talent," they said, "the only thing I was ever truly good at." "Killing. Surviving," she corrected, not looking up from her task. "The killing was incidental." Murchison grunted, unconvinced. "Seemed pretty deliberate to me." Clara found what she was looking for, a set of reports detailing the delivery schedule for the mysterious crates Murchison had mentioned. According to the document, the next shipment was due the following day, with General Grant himself overseeing its placement in the underground magazine. "Change of plans," she announced. "Grant arrives tomorrow, not later in the week." Murchison frowned. "That complicates matters." "No, it simplifies them." Clara spread the captured map on the ground between them. "We intercept the supply wagon here at Cottonwood Crossing. It's the most isolated point on the route from Fort Concho, and the terrain favors an ambush." Murchison frowned. "That complicates matters." "No, it simplifies them." Clara spread the captured map on the ground between them. "We intercept the supply wagon here at Cottonwood Crossing. It's the most isolated point on the route from Fort Concho, and the terrain favors an ambush. And then we infiltrate Devil's Backbone using uniforms from the escort with the supply wagon as our Trojan horse." Clara traced the route with her finger. "Grant will be expecting an external attack, not enemies arriving in his own supply convoy." Murchison studied the map expression, skeptical. "That wagon will have at least 6 guards, maybe more, if Grant himself is coming to meet it." "Exactly why we need to be strategic." Clara outlined her plan, using strategically placed dynamite to separate the wagon from its escort, creating enough confusion to neutralize the guards without destroying the wagon itself. Murchison nodded slowly. "Might work, if we're lucky." "Luck has nothing to do with it, just proper planning and execution." Clara began sorting through their supplies, organizing what they would need for the coming confrontation. "Get some rest. We move at first light." As darkness settled around them, Clara kept first watch, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Murchison's steady breathing told her he'd fallen asleep quickly, the habit of a man accustomed to seizing rest whenever possible. Clara's mind raced, reviewing her plan, identifying potential failure points, developing contingencies. She thought of Thomas, of his gentle hands and quiet ways, of William, who'd never had the chance to grow beyond childhood, of all the others who'd died because of Grant's betrayals. "Soon," she whispered to the night sky. "Soon." The next day dawned clear and cold. Clara and Murchison reached Cottonwood Crossing by mid-morning, giving them ample time to prepare their ambush. The crossing consisted of a shallow ford where the Santa Fe Road crossed a usually dry creek bed. High ground on either side provided excellent positions for observation and attack. Supply wagon typically arrives around noon, Murchison noted, studying the captured schedule. Gives them time to reach Devil's Backbone before sunset. Clara nodded, surveying the terrain. You take position there. She indicated a rocky outcropping overlooking the crossing. I'll set charges here and here, pointing to 2 locations where the road narrowed between boulders. We want to separate the wagon from its escort, not destroy it. Murchison eyed the dynamite skeptically. You sure about using that stuff? Pretty unpredictable. I've handled worse. Clara began preparing the charges, measuring fuse lengths with practiced precision. When the lead riders approach the first choke point, I'll trigger the initial explosion. That should scatter them, create confusion. You pick off any who try to regroup. And the wagon, I'll approach from behind during the chaos, neutralize the driver. Clara secured the last charge. From there, we improvise based on what we're facing. Murchison checked his weapons one last time. And if Grant himself is with the convoy, Clara's expression hardened. Then this ends today instead of tomorrow. They moved to their positions and settled in to wait. Clara lay prone behind a large boulder field glass trained on the road from Fort Concho. The charges were in place, fuses ready. All that remained was for their quarry to appear. An hour passed, then another. Clara remained motionless, conserving energy, focused on her breathing. The discipline of a scout was patience, the ability to remain still and alert for hours, even days if necessary. Just after noon, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Clara counted 8 riders escorting a covered wagon. More security than she'd anticipated, but manageable. As they drew closer, she studied their formation through her field glass. Standard military escort pattern. 2 advance riders, 3 flanking each side of the wagon, the driver, and 1 guard on the wagon itself. No sign of Grant among them. Disappointing, but not unexpected. A general wouldn't typically accompany a routine supply run. Clara waited until the lead riders approached the first choke point, then struck a match and lit the fuse of her first charge. The explosion was perfectly timed, not on the road itself, but just beside it, sending a shower of rock and debris into the path of the advance riders. Their horses reared in panic, throwing 1 rider completely. Before the dust had settled, Clara detonated the second charge behind the main group, effectively cutting off retreat. The soldiers reacted with commendable speed, rifles ready, forming a defensive perimeter around the wagon. But they were looking outward, expecting attack from the surrounding terrain. Murchison opened fire from his position, dropping 2 soldiers with precise shots. The remaining escorts scattered, seeking cover, returning fire toward his location. Clara moved then, using the confusion to approach the wagon from behind. The driver was struggling to control the frightened horses, while the guard beside him fired wildly toward Murchison's position. Neither noticed Clara until she was upon them. A quick shot to the guard's back, and he tumbled from the wagon seat. The driver turned, eyes widening in recognition, not of Clara herself, but of the threat she represented. "Down," she ordered. Remington aimed at his head. "Hands where I can see them." The driver complied, raising trembling hands. "Don't shoot. I'm just the driver." "Stay that way, and you'll live." Clara gestured with her revolver. "Off the wagon. Slow." As the driver climbed down, Clara quickly scanned the wagon's contents. Several wooden crates secured with rope, standard military supplies, and a locked strongbox that likely contained documents and valuables. The firefight between Murchison and the remaining escorts continued, buying her time. Clara secured the driver with rope from the wagon, gagging him to prevent any warnings. "Murchison," she called when there was a momentary lull in gunfire. "Status. 4 down," came the reply. 2 pinned behind rocks to the east, 1 unaccounted for. Clara froze. 1 unaccounted for meant potential danger. She scanned the surroundings, alert for any movement. Too late. A searing pain exploded in her left shoulder as a bullet found its mark. Clara staggered but didn't fall, turning to face her attacker, a blood-smeared soldier who'd circled behind her position. Despite her wounded shoulder, Clara's reaction was instant. 2 shots in rapid succession, both finding their target. The soldier crumpled, rifle dropping unfired. "Murchison," she called, voice tight with pain. "Need to move quickly." The old tracker appeared moments later, rifle ready, scanning for threats. "You're hit." "Shoulder. Not critical." Clara pressed a hand against the wound, stemming the blood flow. "Help me secure the wagon. We need to eliminate the remaining escorts." "Already done," Murchison reported grimly. "Last 2 tried to flank me. Mistake." Clara nodded, accepting this confirmation of his loyalty without comment. "Check the wagon. I need to know what we're transporting." While Murchison examined the wagon's contents, Clara quickly bandaged her shoulder using supplies from her saddlebags. The bullet had passed through cleanly. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening if she could prevent infection. "Weapons mostly," Murchison reported. "New rifles still in Cosmoline. Ammunition. And these," he gestured to 3 heavy crates secured with additional locks. "Too heavy for their size. Could be anything." Clara examined the crates, noting the lack of military markings. "Personal shipment for Grant, most likely. Help me load the bodies in the back. We need to make this look legitimate until we reach the outpost." They worked efficiently, concealing the dead soldiers beneath tarps in the wagon bed. Clara changed into one of the soldiers' uniforms, grimacing as the movement pulled at her wounded shoulder. The fit was poor, but sufficient to pass casual inspection at a distance. "You drive," she instructed Murchison. "I'll ride alongside as escort. If we're challenged, I'll do the talking." Murchison climbed onto the wagon seat. "You think they'll believe a single escort survived an ambush?" "They'll believe whatever I tell them," Clara replied, checking her weapons one final time. "I've got the proper authorizations and passwords from the dispatches we captured. By the time they realize something's wrong, we'll already be inside." They set off toward Devil's Backbone, leaving the ambush site behind. Clara rode alongside the wagon, posture military straight, despite the throbbing pain in her shoulder. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of coming rain. Good. It would obscure visibility, provide additional cover for their approach. As they traveled, Clara considered their next steps. Getting inside Devil's Backbone was only the first challenge. Once there, she would need to locate Grant's quarters, find evidence of his illegal operations, and ultimately confront the man himself. And somewhere in that fortress might be Samuel, if the boy hadn't managed to escape as she'd hoped. Another complication, another responsibility. "What's your real plan once we're inside?" Murchison asked quietly as they approached the final stretch of road leading to the outpost. "You and I against an entire garrison isn't favorable odds even for someone with your talents." Clara eyed the imposing silhouette of Devil's Backbone now visible on the horizon. "I don't intend to fight the entire garrison, just Grant. The rest will stand down once they understand what he's done." Pretty optimistic view of military loyalty. Not optimism, experience. Clara adjusted her position, easing pressure on her wounded shoulder. Most of those men are soldiers following orders. Once they realize those orders are unlawful, they'll do their duty. Murchison didn't seem convinced, but he nodded anyway. "Hope you're right, for both our sakes." As they drew closer to Devil's Backbone, Clara noted the increased security since her last observation. Additional sentries on the walls, mounted patrols circling the perimeter. Grant was expecting trouble. Good. Expected trouble came from expected directions. Clara intended to approach from where he felt safest. The challenge came when they were still half a mile from the gates. "Halt and identify," called a sentry from a forward position. Clara urged her horse forward, hand raised in greeting. "Corporal James Davis, escort detail from Fort Concho," she called back, using the name from the identification she'd taken from one of the dead soldiers. "Supply wagon for General Grant." The sentry approached cautiously, rifle ready, but not aimed. "Password, Silverado," Clara replied confidently, recalling the code from the captured documents. "We were ambushed 5 miles back, lost most of the escort. Need immediate entry and medical attention." The sentry examined her bloody uniform, noted her apparent rank and the official escort insignia. What happened? Bandits. At least 10, maybe more. Professional job. Clara gestured toward the wagon. We fought them off, but at a cost. The supplies are secure. After a moment's hesitation, the sentry nodded. Proceed to the main gate. I'll alert the watch commander. Clara acknowledged this with a crisp salute and signaled Murchison to continue. As they approached the massive gates of Devil's Backbone, she felt a familiar tension. The calm before combat, the clarity of purpose that came with imminent danger. The gates swung open, revealing the bustling activity of an active military outpost. Soldiers moved purposefully between buildings. Sentries patrolled the walls. Wagons and horses crowded the central yard. Devil's Backbone had been fully reactivated far beyond what Clara had observed from a distance. A lieutenant approached as they entered, accompanied by 4 armed soldiers. Corporal Davis, Lieutenant Wilson, I understand you were ambushed. Clara dismounted, delivering another precise salute despite her injury. Yes, sir. Professional job. They hit us at Cottonwood Crossing, explosives and rifle fire. Most of the escort was killed in the initial attack. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. And yet you secured the wagon and escaped. My duty, sir. Clara stood at rigid attention, projecting military discipline with every fiber of her being. The supplies are undamaged. Driver can confirm my report. Murchison nodded from the wagon seat, playing his role. Bandits hit us hard, sir. Corporal here saved my hide, got us through. Lieutenant Wilson studied them both, suspicious but not yet alarmed. The general will want a full report. He's particularly interested in this shipment. Happy to provide it, sir, Clara responded. After medical attention, if possible. She gestured to her bloody shoulder. Wilson nodded. Report to the infirmary. I'll have men secure the wagon and deliver the supplies to the underground magazine. He turned to issue orders to his men. Clara saw her opportunity slipping away. Sir, with respect, the general gave explicit instructions that these supplies were to be personally verified upon delivery. Corporal Michaels can confirm. She nodded toward Murchison, gambling that the lieutenant wouldn't know all the personnel involved in the operation. Murchison played along seamlessly. Those were the orders, sir. General's personal inspection before storage. Lieutenant Wilson hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the purported orders from his commanding officer. The general is in conference at present, not to be disturbed. Then we'll wait, sir, Clara insisted. Orders were very specific. After a moment's consideration, Wilson nodded. Very well. Secure the wagon near the command building. But report to the infirmary first, Corporal. That wound needs attention. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As the lieutenant walked away, Clara exchanged a quick glance with Murchison. First hurdle cleared. They were inside the fortress. The infirmary was housed in a small building near the center of the compound. Clara entered cautiously alert for any sign that her deception might be discovered. A single medical orderly greeted her, gesturing toward an examination table. Another one, eh? Busy day. The orderly, a young man barely out of his teens, began gathering supplies. Wound type, rifle, through and through. Clara removed her stolen uniform jacket with practiced movements that concealed her discomfort. The orderly examined the hastily bandaged wound. Clean enough? Missed anything vital from the looks of it? Lucky. Clara said nothing as he cleaned and properly dressed the injury. Her mind was working, absorbing details of the outpost's layout, counting personnel, identifying potential escape routes. The general's in residence, I hear, she commented casually as the orderly finished his work. Must be important business. Above my pay grade, the young man replied with a shrug. But the place has been upside down for days getting ready. Special guests arriving tomorrow, supposedly. Clara filed this information away. Any idea who? Mexican officials, some say. Others think it's army brass from Washington. The orderly secured the bandage. Like I said, above my pay grade. All I know is we're under strict orders to maintain absolute security. Clara thanked him and departed, making her way back to where Murchison waited with the wagon. The old tracker had positioned it strategically near the command building as ordered, but where they had a clear view of the compound's inner structures. Infirmary's clear, she murmured as she approached. "Any problems here?" Murchison shook his head slightly. "All quiet. They're waiting for the general's availability before unloading." Clara nodded, scanning the surroundings with professional assessment. The command building stood 3 stories tall, constructed of local stone, with narrow windows and a single main entrance guarded by 2 soldiers. Adjacent to it was a smaller structure that Clara recognized as the officers' quarters, and beyond that the underground entrance to the powder magazine mentioned in the captured documents. "Grant's either in the command building or the officers' quarters," she noted quietly. "We need access to both." "And how do you propose we manage that with guards at every door?" Clara's response was interrupted by the arrival of a staff sergeant who approached with purposeful strides. "Corporal Davis, General Grant will see you now regarding the delivery. Follow me." Clara exchanged a quick glance with Murchison. This was unexpected and potentially disastrous. Grant would certainly recognize her despite the years and changes in her appearance. "Sir, with respect," she responded, thinking quickly. "I was instructed to remain with the wagon until inspection, security protocols." The sergeant frowned. "Direct order, Corporal. The driver will secure the wagon." Clara had no choice. To refuse would raise immediate suspicion. "Yes, sir." As she followed the sergeant toward the command building, Clara adjusted her plan. Perhaps this was an opportunity rather than a setback. A direct audience with Grant in his own headquarters. It would be dangerous, but it might also be the cleanest way to accomplish her mission. She checked her weapons discreetly. The Remington revolver was securely holstered at her hip, partially concealed by the uniform jacket. The knife in her boot remained undetected during her infirmary visit. Not ideal for confronting a well-guarded officer, but she'd worked with less. The sergeant led her through the command building's main entrance, past the guards who barely glanced at them, and up a flight of stairs to the 2nd floor. Here, the military efficiency of the outpost gave way to unexpected luxury. Fine carpets covering the stone floors, oil paintings on the walls, gaslight fixtures instead of simple lanterns. They stopped before a heavy oak door. The sergeant knocked sharply. "Enter," called a voice from within. A voice Clara would have recognized anywhere. Elias Grant. The sergeant opened the door, announced, "Corporal Davis from the supply convoy, sir," and ushered Clara inside before departing, closing the door behind him. Clara found herself in a spacious office dominated by a massive desk covered with maps and documents. Behind it sat General Elias Grant, older, grayer, heavier than she remembered, but unmistakable with his piercing blue eyes and rigid military bearing. He looked up from his papers, studied her for a moment, then froze, recognition dawning across his features. "My God," he whispered, face paling. "Blackwood." Clara smiled coldly. "Hello, Elias. It's been a while." Grant's hand moved toward a drawer in his desk, undoubtedly where he kept a weapon. Clara drew her Remington with practiced speed, aiming directly at his head. "I wouldn't," she advised quietly. "Not if you want to live long enough to explain yourself." Grant's hand stilled. His shock gave way to a calculating assessment as he leaned back in his chair. "You look terrible, Clara. Being dead doesn't seem to agree with you." "Being betrayed tends to have that effect." Clara maintained her aim steady despite her wounded shoulder. "Thomas Maddox, my husband, you had him killed." "A regrettable necessity." Grant's voice held no remorse. "You left me little choice." "There's always a choice, Elias. You just consistently make the wrong one." Clara circled to the side of the desk, keeping the revolver trained on him. "The border operations, the intelligence you sold to both sides, the patrols you deliberately sent into ambushes, including the one that killed my son." Grant's expression hardened. "You never could see the bigger picture, Clara. What I did was for the good of the country, for stability on the border." "For your bank account, you mean? For your advancement?" Clara's voice remained steady, though rage burned just beneath the surface. "I have the documents, Elias. All of them. The financial transfers, the correspondence with Mexican officials, the altered patrol routes." Something flickered across Grant's face. Concern quickly masked. "Documents can be forged. Your word against mine, a decorated general versus a woman who abandoned her post, assumed a false identity." "Perhaps. But there are others who know. Judge Williams in Santa Fe, for one. If I don't return, he receives everything." This was a bluff. The documents were still hidden, would only reach the judge if Esther followed through on her promise, but Grant had no way of knowing that. A heavy silence fell between them, years of history and betrayal condensing into this single moment. "What do you want, Clara?" Grant asked finally. "Justice. For Thomas. For William. For all the others you sacrificed." "Justice," Grant repeated, a humorless smile twisting his lips. "Do you even know what we're doing here, the peace we're securing? I know you're running guns through a decommissioned outpost using military resources for private profit, just as you did during the border conflicts." Grant laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Is that what you think this is, another gun-running operation?" He gestured toward the window where the wagon containing the mysterious crates stood in the yard below. "Those crates don't contain weapons, Clara. They contain gold. Mexican gold being transferred north under official government sanction." Clara's aim didn't waver, but confusion flickered across her features. "What are you talking about?" "A treaty. New boundary agreements with Mexico. Financial compensation for territorial adjustments." Grant's eyes gleamed with something like pride. "Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to secure this years of diplomacy of careful negotiations? And tomorrow it will be finalized right here with the arrival of the Mexican delegation." Clara studied him, trying to separate truth from manipulation. "You expect me to believe you're suddenly a diplomat? That this is official government business? Check the crates yourself. Or better yet—" Grant slowly opened the drawer he'd reached for earlier, withdrawing not a weapon but a leather portfolio. "Read the treaty, the official dispatches from Washington. It's all here." He placed the portfolio on the desk, slid it toward her. Clara didn't move to take it. "And Thomas was his death official government business too." Grant's expression hardened again. "A complication. You were a loose end from my past one that could jeopardize everything I've built. When I learned you were alive, married to a postal carrier who traveled routes that could compromise our security—" He spread his hands. "I made a tactical decision." "You ordered his death." "I ordered confirmation of his identity and the retrieval of any sensitive documents he might be carrying. The violence was—" Grant hesitated. "Excessive. Vaughn's men are efficient but crude." Clara felt cold rage building inside her. "You think that explanation changes anything, that it absolves you? I think it provides context. I think it demonstrates that what happened to your husband was an unfortunate casualty in service of a greater good." Grant leaned forward, his voice taking on an earnest quality Clara had heard before when he was preparing to deliver some particularly egregious lie. "Join us, Clara. We could use someone with your skills. After the treaty signing, I'll be establishing a new border security force. You could be part of building something lasting, something that matters." Clara stared at him, incredulous. "You murdered my husband, had me shot and left for dead, and now you're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a purpose, redemption even." Grant gestured broadly. "What's your alternative? Kill me. You'd never escape this outpost alive. And then what would your sacrifice accomplish? The treaty would still proceed. Another officer would take my place." For a moment Clara said nothing, weighing his words. Then, decision made, she slowly lowered her revolver. "Let me see the treaty," she said. Relief flickered across Grant's face as he pushed the portfolio closer. "You're making the right choice, Clara. Together we can—" The gunshot echoed in the confined space, deafening in its suddenness. Grant jerked backward, a look of genuine surprise on his face as he glanced down at the spreading red stain on his uniform jacket. Clara had fired from hip level, not at his head where he'd been watching her aim, but at his chest. "That's for Thomas," she said quietly. Grant slumped in his chair, blood bubbling from his lips as he struggled to speak. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly." Clara retrieved the portfolio from the desk, tucked it into her uniform jacket. "Whatever treaty exists, whatever diplomatic arrangements you've made, they'll proceed without you. As you said, another officer will take your place." She moved to the door, listening for sounds of alarm. The office was well insulated. The single shot hadn't carried beyond its walls. Grant's breathing grew labored. His eyes locked on hers with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You'll never escape." "I don't need to escape, Elias. I just need to survive long enough to ensure justice is done." Clara checked the corridor, found it empty. "Goodbye, General." She closed the door quietly behind her, leaving Grant to his fate, and moved purposefully down the hallway, maintaining the confident posture of a soldier on official business. The portfolio was secure inside her jacket, perhaps containing the evidence she needed to validate Grant's claims, or expose them as yet another deception. Either way, her mission wasn't complete. Grant might die from his wound, or he might survive long enough to raise the alarm. Clara needed to reach Murchison, recover any additional evidence from the mysterious crates, and extract from Devil's Backbone before the body was discovered. And somewhere in this fortress might be Samuel. If the boy was still alive, if he hadn't escaped as she'd hoped, if Murchison's claim of ignorance about him was genuine. Too many variables, too many unknowns. But Clara had operated under worse conditions during the border conflicts. One step at a time. Adapt. Survive. She descended the stairs, nodding to the guards at the entrance as she passed, projecting calm authority. The courtyard was busy with routine activities, soldiers drilling wagons being unloaded, horses tended. No sign of alarm yet. Murchison remained with their wagon, his expression carefully neutral as she approached. "Well," he murmured when she was close enough. "Change of plans," Clara replied quietly. "We need to verify the contents of those crates, then get out of here. Immediately." Understanding dawned in the old tracker's eyes. He didn't ask for details, simply nodded. "Guards are expecting official inspection before unloading. We might have a few minutes." Clara surveyed the courtyard, calculating options. "The underground magazine. Where is the entrance?" Murchison nodded toward a heavy steel door set into the base of the command building. "There, guarded naturally." "How many supply wagons arrived today before ours?" "3 by my count, regular provisions mostly." Clara's mind worked rapidly, assembling a plan from available resources. "We need a diversion, something to clear the courtyard temporarily without raising a full alarm." Murchison considered this. "Fire would do it. Stables maybe. Too many innocent animals." Clara's gaze settled on a supply shed near the perimeter wall. "There. What's stored inside?" "Dry goods from the looks of the wagons that unloaded there. Flour, coffee, basic provisions." "Perfect." Clara discreetly removed a stick of dynamite from her boot where she'd concealed it earlier. "Create enough confusion for us to check these crates and access the underground magazine if necessary. Once I confirm what's in them, we move to extraction." Murchison eyed the explosive warily. "And how do you propose to get that over there without being seen?" Clara smiled grimly. "I don't. You'll create a distraction here, draw attention away from me. Arguments with the guards about unloading procedures, perhaps." The old tracker nodded, understanding her intent. "On your signal, then." Clara moved casually toward the supply shed, dynamite concealed in her palm fuse trimmed short. As she walked, she struck a match against her boot heel, keeping the flame hidden within her cupped hand. Behind her, Murchison's voice rose in apparent anger. "These supplies need proper inspection. You can't just unload them anywhere." Guards turned toward the commotion, attention diverted. Clara lit the fuse, tossed the dynamite through a partially open window in the supply shed, and continued walking without breaking stride. She'd reached the wagon when the explosion rocked the compound. Not devastating, she'd used minimal charge, but sufficient to create chaos. Flames erupted from the shed, soldiers ran toward it shouting orders, and amid the confusion, Clara and Murchison seized their opportunity. They moved to the rear of the wagon, opened one of the mysterious crates, while everyone's attention was focused on the fire. Inside, as Grant had claimed, were rows of gleaming gold bars, each stamped with official Mexican government seals. "He was telling the truth," Clara murmured, surprised despite herself. "About the gold, at least," Murchison noted, securing the crate again. Clara scanned the courtyard. In the confusion, the guards had left their posts at the underground magazine entrance. The document storage would be below. We need to—" Her words cut off as a familiar figure emerged from a side building across the courtyard. A small, thin boy with dark hair flanked by 2 armed soldiers. Samuel. The boy's eyes widened in recognition as he spotted Clara. He took an instinctive step toward her before one of his guards grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "You know him?" Murchison asked, following her gaze. "Yes." Clara's mind raced, plans shifting, priorities realigning. "Change of plans. We need to get him out." Before Murchison could respond, an alarm bell began to ring throughout the compound. At the same moment, a soldier burst from the command building shouting, "The general's been shot! Lock down the fortress. No one enters or leaves." Clara cursed under her breath. Someone had found Grant sooner than expected. "Options." Murchison assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Main gate's already closing. We could try the south wall, it's lowest, and the confusion might give us cover." "Not without Samuel." The old tracker looked at her sharply. "You're risking everything for a boy you barely know." "I risked everything for less." Clara watched as the soldiers hustled Samuel back into the building. "Create another diversion. Something bigger this time. I'll get the boy." Murchison hesitated, then nodded. "South wall, 20 minutes. If you're not there, I'm leaving without you." "Fair enough." As Murchison moved away, Clara circled toward the building where they'd taken Samuel, using the continuing chaos from the fire and the new alarm about Grant to mask her movements. Soldiers rushed in all directions, officers shouted contradictory orders, and amid the confusion a single corporal attracted little attention. The building appeared to be a converted barracks, 2 stories with narrow windows and a single guarded entrance. The guard looked nervous, clearly torn between maintaining his post and responding to the chaotic situation in the courtyard. Clara approached, directly projecting official purpose. "Relief," she announced. "You're needed at the command building. General's orders." The young soldier hesitated. "I wasn't informed." "It's chaos out there, Private. Direct order from Lieutenant Wilson. The prisoner is secure. I'll maintain position here." The mention of his superior officer's name tipped the balance. The guard nodded, handed her the key to the door, and hurried toward the command building. Clara waited until he was out of sight, then unlocked the door and slipped inside. The interior was dimly lit, divided into small cells that had once been individual quarters for soldiers. Most stood empty, but from the farthest one she heard a child's voice. "I told you, I don't know anything else." Clara moved silently down the corridor, alert for other guards. She reached the occupied cell, peered through the small barred window in its door. Samuel sat on a narrow cot, face tear-streaked but defiant, glaring at a soldier who stood over him. The man's back was to Clara, but his voice was unmistakable. "You're lying, boy. The woman who helped you escape. Describe her again." "Vaughn, the leader of the ambush party that had killed Thomas." Samuel's eyes flicked toward the door, widened slightly as he spotted Clara. To his credit, his expression changed only for an instant before he continued his defiant stare at Vaughn. "I told you already. Tall, dark hair. I didn't see her face clearly." Vaughn raised his hand as if to strike the boy. "You spent hours with her. You must have seen more." Clara had heard enough. She unlocked the cell door quietly, swung it open, and leveled her revolver at the back of Vaughn's head. "He sees me quite clearly now," she said. "As do you." Vaughn stiffened but didn't turn. "Blackwood, should have made sure you were dead." "Many have made that mistake." Clara gestured with the revolver. "Step away from the boy." Vaughn complied, turning slowly to face her. Up close she could see details missed during the ambush. A scar running from his temple to his jaw, cold blue eyes that assessed rather than feared. "Grant," he asked simply. "Dying, if not already dead." Vaughn nodded, unsurprised. "And now what? You'll shoot me too, in front of the child." Clara glanced at Samuel. "Close your eyes, Samuel." The boy obeyed instantly. Clara returned her attention to Vaughn. "You killed my husband." "A job, nothing personal." "It was personal to me." Clara tightened her finger on the trigger, then paused as a loud explosion rocked the building. Murchison's diversion right on time. "We're leaving." "You won't make it 100 yards, Vaughn warned. "The outpost is locked down. Every soldier has orders to shoot escapees on sight." "Then I'll have to ensure we're not seen." Clara gestured with the revolver again. "Uniform, remove it." Vaughn's eyes narrowed, understanding her intent. "And if I refuse, then Samuel keeps his eyes closed a moment longer." With deliberate slowness, Vaughn removed his officer's jacket and gun belt as instructed. Clara kept her weapon trained on him, alert for any sudden movements. "Samuel," she called, not taking her eyes off Vaughn. "Come here. Stay behind me." The boy scrambled off the cot, moved to her side. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. "I promised, didn't I?" Clara handed him Vaughn's jacket. "Put this on. It's too big, but it might help hide your identity from a distance." As Samuel complied, Clara assessed their options. The explosion, significantly larger than her first diversion, would have drawn most personnel to that section of the compound. If Murchison had targeted the area near the south wall as instructed, their escape route might be temporarily clear. "Sit on the cot," she ordered Vaughn. "Hands behind your back." Once he complied, she used his own belt to secure his wrists to the metal frame, then gagged him with a strip torn from the bedsheet. It wouldn't hold him for long, but they didn't need long. "Let's go," she told Samuel, guiding him toward the door. "Stay close. Do exactly as I say." They moved into the corridor, Clara checking for threats before proceeding. The building remained empty, all available personnel apparently responding to the multiple emergencies unfolding across the compound. Outside, the situation was controlled chaos. Soldiers ran toward a massive fire now engulfing what appeared to be the ammunition storage. Murchison had chosen his target well. Occasional explosions sent debris flying as stored ammunition caught fire, forcing responders to maintain their distance. "South wall," Clara murmured to Samuel, guiding him along the perimeter of the courtyard using buildings for cover. "Quick, but not running. Act like you belong." The boy nodded, matching her pace. Despite his obvious fear, he maintained remarkable composure, following her lead without question. They were halfway to their destination when Clara spotted a problem. A checkpoint had been established near the south wall, soldiers checking everyone attempting to approach that section. "Change of plans," she whispered, steering Samuel toward the stables instead. "Horses." The stables were minimally guarded, most handlers having been drafted to fight the fire. Clara and Samuel slipped inside, finding the long building filled with nervous horses disturbed by the commotion outside. "Can you ride?" Clara asked quickly, locating saddles and bridles. Samuel nodded. "The mission school taught us." "Good boy." Clara selected 2 horses, a sturdy bay for herself and a smaller, gentler mare for Samuel. As they prepared the animals, she explained her revised plan. "We'll leave through the east gate. I'll claim I'm evacuating you for safety due to the ammunition fire. If challenged, let me do the talking." Samuel nodded solemnly. "What about your friend, the old man by the wagon?" "Murchison can take care of himself," Clara replied, though she felt a twinge of concern for the tracker. Their arrangement had been clear: 20 minutes south wall. Circumstances had forced a change, but Murchison might not realize that. They mounted the horses, and Clara led them from the stables, projecting calm authority as they rode across the compound toward the east gate. As predicted, the guards were more concerned with preventing entry than controlling exit, particularly with the ammunition fire threatening to spread. "Evacuation of non-essential personnel," Clara announced as they approached the gate. "Boys' safety is priority." The gate guards, young and clearly rattled by the deteriorating situation, barely glanced at her identification before waving them through. Moments later, they were outside the fortress walls, urging their horses to a canter along the eastern trail. Clara glanced back at Devil's Backbone, now partially obscured by smoke from the ongoing fire. No pursuit yet. They were likely still sorting out the multiple crises within the walls. But it wouldn't take long for someone to connect the dots between Grant's shooting the prisoner's escape and the mysterious corporal who had arrived with the supply wagon. "Where are we going?" Samuel asked as they continued their swift retreat. "Somewhere safe," Clara assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain such a place existed. With Grant potentially dead by her hand with evidence of a major diplomatic arrangement possibly sabotaged with Mexican gold stolen or destroyed, the consequences would be far-reaching. They rode for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the fortress before Clara allowed a brief rest for the horses. As Samuel watered the animals from a small stream, Clara surveyed their position, calculating options. Bennett's Crossing lay 2 days' ride to the east, the original destination she'd suggested when she'd first freed Samuel from the bandits, but with pursuit likely organized by now established settlements would be watched. The border was 3 days south, but crossing into Mexico carried its own risks, particularly if Grant's claims about the treaty were true. The Mexican authorities might be equally motivated to apprehend them. North offered the mountains, difficult terrain but familiar to Clara from her scouting days, places to hide, to lose pursuers, to survive until she could determine her next moves. "We head north," she decided as Samuel returned with the horses, "into the mountains." The boy nodded, accepting her judgment without question. His trust was both touching and burdensome. Another life depending on her decisions, her ability to protect him from the consequences of her actions. They had remounted and were preparing to depart when Clara heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of a horse approaching at speed. From the east, not the direction of Devil's Backbone. Clara drew her revolver, positioned herself between Samuel and the approaching rider. "Stay behind me," she instructed. The rider appeared around a bend in the trail, a familiar figure on a lathered horse. Murchison. The old tracker reined in sharply when he spotted them, relief evident in his weathered features. "Thought you'd be halfway to Mexico by now," he called. "Changed plans when the south route was blocked," Clara explained, holstering her weapon. "How did you find us?" Murchison dismounted, allowing his exhausted horse to drink from the stream. "Wasn't hard. You left a trail even an amateur could follow. Need to work on that if we're going to stay ahead of what's coming." "And what exactly is coming?" "Everything." Murchison's expression was grim. "Grant's dead. The treaty documents are missing, presumed stolen by the assassin. A fortune in Mexican gold has been destroyed or looted, and a prisoner with knowledge of the operation has escaped." He gestured toward Samuel. "They're mobilizing everything they have. Military and civilian authorities across 3 territories will be looking for us within days." Clara absorbed this mind racing. "The gold wasn't destroyed. It was still in the wagon when we left." "Not anymore." Murchison scratched his beard. "Wagon caught fire during my little diversion. Most dramatic thing I could think of. Didn't realize exactly what was in those crates until they started melting." "You destroyed the gold." It wasn't a question. "Along with any evidence that it was ever there." Murchison shrugged. "Seemed like a good idea at the time." Clara wasn't sure whether to be horrified or impressed by the tracker's initiative. The destruction of the gold eliminated tangible evidence of Grant's diplomatic mission, evidence that might have supported his claims that he was operating under official sanction. "The treaty," she said, remembering the portfolio she'd taken from Grant's office. She withdrew it from inside her jacket, examined the contents. Official documents indeed, bearing government seals and signatures, outlining boundary agreements and financial compensation arrangements with Mexico. Clara read quickly, her dismay growing. If these documents were genuine, and they appeared to be, then Grant had been telling the truth at least partially. This was an official diplomatic mission sanctioned at the highest levels, and she had just assassinated the U.S. official responsible for its completion. "Well," Murchison prompted. "It's real," Clara admitted, securing the documents again. "Grant was acting under official orders. The treaty signing was scheduled for tomorrow." Murchison whistled softly. "That complicates matters. From assassin of a corrupt officer to assassin of a diplomatic envoy. They'll hang you twice for that. If they catch me—" Clara's mind worked rapidly, adjusting to this new reality. But the treaty wasn't public knowledge. The gold shipments were conducted in secret. There are still questions about Grant's methods, his past actions. Questions that won't matter much to the firing squad. Clara couldn't argue with that assessment. Whatever Grant's past crimes, his current mission appeared legitimate. The distinction would be lost on authorities investigating his murder. "We need to disappear," she decided. "At least until I can make sense of all this, determine the best course of action. Disappear where 3 territories will be searching for us." Clara considered their options. Utah, perhaps? Or north into Wyoming, somewhere beyond the immediate jurisdiction of territorial authorities here. Murchison shook his head. "Won't work. Not with the boy. 2 adults might pass unnoticed, but a child traveling with them, too memorable." He was right, Clara realized. Samuel's presence, while non-negotiable to her, significantly complicated their escape. The boy needed safety, stability, not a life on the run with 2 fugitives. "I know a place," Samuel said, suddenly breaking his silence. "In the mountains. The old ones showed me." Clara and Murchison both turned to him, surprised. "What old ones?" Clara asked gently. "At the mission, before they took me away. There are caves high up. The old Apache used them when the soldiers came. No one else knows about them." Clara exchanged glances with Murchison. The boy might be offering a temporary solution at least, a place to regroup to plan their next moves. "Can you find these caves again?" she asked Samuel. The boy nodded confidently. "I remember the way. 3 days' ride near the big rock that looks like a sleeping bear." Clara knew the formation he described. Bear Mountain in the high country north of Devil's Backbone. Remote, difficult terrain, but navigable with proper guidance. "It's worth trying," she decided, "at least until we determine our next steps." Murchison seemed skeptical but nodded his agreement. "Better than standing here waiting for the cavalry to find us." They remounted, Samuel now riding proudly at the lead, guiding them toward the mountain passages he remembered. Clara watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern. The boy had endured captivity, witnessed violence, been thrust into dangers no child should face. Yet here he was, resilient and determined. She thought of her own son William, who'd never had the chance to show such strength, who'd died because of Grant's treachery, because of her absence when he needed her most. Perhaps in protecting Samuel she could atone for that failure, could find some measure of redemption amid the chaos she'd created. As they rode into the gathering dusk, Clara felt the weight of the treaty documents inside her jacket. Evidence of a diplomatic mission she'd disrupted, perhaps destroyed. Evidence that complicated her narrative of justice and vengeance. Grant was dead by her hand. That much was certain. Whether it was justice or murder would depend on what she did next. 3 days later, Clara stood at the mouth of a high mountain cave, surveying the land below through her field glass. From this elevation she could see for miles in all directions. The winding trails through pine forests, the distant shimmer of a lake, and far to the south, the faintest outline of Devil's Backbone. Samuel had led them true. The network of caves nestled in a nearly inaccessible section of Bear Mountain offered perfect concealment. Multiple chambers connected by narrow passages, natural chimneys that dispersed smoke to prevent detection, and most importantly, a hidden spring that provided fresh water regardless of weather conditions. Apache used these caves for generations, Samuel had explained as he'd shown them the complex, until the soldiers came with cannons and blasted the lower slopes. Now only the old ones remember. The boy had proven invaluable in other ways as well, identifying edible plants, setting simple snares for small game, navigating terrain that would have challenged even Clara's experienced eye. His resilience continued to impress her. Murchison had contributed his own skills, establishing perimeter alarms and observation posts, concealing their horses in a hidden meadow a half-mile distant. The old tracker had initially expressed skepticism about their chances, but had thrown himself into the task of securing their temporary refuge with professional thoroughness. Clara lowered the field glass, noting movement on one of the trails below. A patrol of 6 riders moving methodically through the forest. The 4th such group she'd observed in the past 2 days. The search for Grant's assassin continued, expanding outward from Devil's Backbone in an ever-widening circle. Soon they would reach Bear Mountain. "See something?" Murchison asked, joining her at the cave entrance. "Patrol, 6 riders, southern approach." Clara handed him the field glass. Military, not civilian. Murchison observed for a moment, then nodded. Regular sweep pattern. They're being thorough. Too thorough for a routine manhunt. Nothing routine about killing a general and disrupting an international treaty. Murchison returned the field glass. They want blood. Clara couldn't argue with his assessment. The search patterns indicated a major operation, resources committed from multiple jurisdictions. Her actions at Devil's Backbone had escalated far beyond personal vengeance. "How's our ammunition?" she asked. "Low. 20 rounds for the Remington, maybe 30 for the Winchester." Murchison gestured toward their meager supplies. "Enough for a skirmish, not a siege." Clara nodded, considering options. "And the boy?" "Sleeping, exhausted from yesterday's foraging." Murchison studied her face. "You've grown attached to him." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "He reminds me of William, the son I failed to protect." "You can't replace one with the other." "I'm not trying to." Clara turned back to the view below. "But I can ensure Samuel doesn't suffer the same fate." Murchison was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "You need to make a decision, Clara, about the documents, about what comes next. We can't hide in these caves forever." He was right, of course. The treaty portfolio remained secure in her possession, evidence of a diplomatic mission she'd disrupted with Grant's assassination. In the 3 days since their escape, Clara had reviewed its contents repeatedly, searching for inconsistencies, for proof that Grant's claims of legitimacy had been false. She'd found none. The treaty appeared genuine, the diplomatic arrangements official. Grant's role as envoy appeared properly sanctioned by the government, which left her in an impossible position. If she surfaced, presented her evidence of Grant's past crimes, it would now be overshadowed by her assassination of an official diplomatic representative. Justice for Thomas, for William, for all the others Grant had sacrificed, would be lost amid the greater crime she'd committed. Yet remaining in hiding meant those crimes would never be exposed at all. Grant would be remembered as a hero, a diplomat cut down in service to his country rather than the traitor he truly was. "I've been considering our options," Clara said finally. "They're limited but not non-existent." "I'm listening." "The treaty signing was scheduled 3 days ago. By now the Mexican delegation will have departed, the diplomatic arrangements in disarray." Clara gestured toward the distant outline of Devil's Backbone. "Whoever has taken command after Grant will be focused on damage control, on minimizing the international incident." Murchison nodded. "And on finding those responsible." "Yes. But that focus creates an opportunity." Clara outlined her thinking. "The documents I took from Grant's office include communications with his contacts in Washington, officials who were aware of his diplomatic mission. If I can get those documents to Judge Williams in Santa Fe as originally planned, there's a chance the full scope of Grant's activities can be exposed." "You'd still be a fugitive accused of assassinating a U.S. general." "True. But with the judge's help, with proper presentation of the evidence, I might at least ensure Grant's legacy reflects his true nature." Clara's expression hardened. "That matters to me. He doesn't deserve to be remembered as a hero." Murchison considered this. "Santa Fe is 100 miles south. Every settlement between here and there will be watched, every trail monitored. Which is why I'll go alone." Clara held up a hand to forestall his objection. "You'll take Samuel to safety, north to the mining communities in Colorado. You know those territories better than I do, can find somewhere the boy will be cared for. And you expect me to just leave you to certain capture or death?" Murchison shook his head. "Not a chance." "It's not a request, Murchison. It's the only logical solution." Clara's voice softened slightly. "I started this. I'll finish it. Samuel deserves a chance at a normal life away from all this. You can give him that." Before Murchison could respond, a sound from behind them drew their attention, a small gasp quickly stifled. Samuel stood in the passage leading to the inner caves, eyes wide. "You're leaving?" he asked, voice small but steady. Clara moved to him, knelt to his level. "Not yet. But soon, yes. You'll go with Murchison somewhere safe." "I don't want to go with him. I want to stay with you." Samuel's chin lifted in defiance. "That's not possible, Samuel. What I have to do, it's dangerous. Everything we've done is dangerous." The boy's logic was impeccable. "I helped you find these caves. I can help more." Clara glanced at Murchison, who shrugged as if to say, "He has a point." "Samuel," she began gently, "this isn't about your abilities. You've been brave and resourceful beyond any expectation. But I made a promise to protect you, and I can't do that where I'm going. You protected me at Devil's Backbone. You can protect me anywhere." His faith in her was both touching and terrifying. Clara searched for words that would make him understand, that would convince him without crushing his spirit. Before she could respond, Murchison interrupted sharply. "Movement. Eastern Ridge." Clara was on her feet instantly, field glass to her eye. Through the lens she spotted what had alarmed the tracker, a lone rider moving along the ridge opposite their position, too distant to identify but clearly following a deliberate path rather than a standard patrol route. "Scout," she muttered, "looking for signs of our passage." Murchison nodded grimly. "Found something from the looks of it. See how he keeps stopping, examining the ground." Clara watched as the distant figure dismounted, knelt to study something on the trail, then remounted and continued with increased purpose. "He's tracking us directly," she confirmed. "Someone who knows what they're looking for." "Vaughn," Murchison suggested. "Possibly." Clara handed him the field glass. "How long before he reaches the lower caves?" 2 hours, maybe less. Depends how good he is. Good enough to follow our trail this far." Clara's mind raced, calculating options. "We need to move, now. Gather only what's essential." As Murchison and Samuel hurried to collect their minimal belongings, Clara made a swift decision. The discovery of their hideout accelerated her timetable, forced her hand. "Change of plans," she announced when they rejoined her. "We leave together, but we separate at the first opportunity. Murchison, you and Samuel head northeast toward the mining territories as discussed. I'll create a diversion, draw pursuit west before turning south toward Santa Fe." Murchison frowned. "You're assuming they'll follow you instead of us." "They will when they realize I'm carrying the treaty documents." "Deliberately making yourself the primary target." Murchison shook his head. "Risky." "Necessary," Clara countered. "Samuel's safety remains the priority. This gives you the best chance of getting him clear." Samuel looked between them, clearly understanding the implications. "I still think we should stay together." Clara knelt before him again. "Remember what I told you about tactical decisions? Sometimes the best strategy is to divide forces to create multiple targets the enemy can't effectively pursue." The boy nodded reluctantly. "But you'll find us after right when you're done in Santa Fe." Clara met his eyes, unwilling to offer false hope, but unable to crush his spirit with brutal honesty. "I'll do everything in my power," she promised. They worked quickly, gathering supplies, preparing the horses, obscuring signs of their occupation. Clara distributed the remaining ammunition, ensuring Murchison had the majority. He would have Samuel to protect, would need the resources more than she would. As they prepared to depart, Clara took a final moment with the treaty portfolio, considering its contents. The documents were genuine as far as she could determine, but incomplete. Certain referenced attachments were missing, suggesting Grant had maintained separate files elsewhere in Devil's Backbone, perhaps in the underground magazine Murchison had mentioned. Without those additional documents, her evidence against Grant remained circumstantial. His past crimes during the border conflicts, his betrayal that had led to William's death, all would be overshadowed by her assassination of a legitimate diplomatic envoy. Unless she could find those missing attachments, unless she could complete the picture. A plan began to form. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but with the potential to achieve what she'd set out to do. To expose Grant's true nature, to ensure justice for those he'd sacrificed. "We're ready," Murchison announced, interrupting her thoughts. Clara nodded, securing the portfolio inside her jacket. "We take the northwest passage down. It's steeper but offers better cover. Once we reach the tree line, we separate." They mounted in silence, Samuel riding double with Murchison as they began the treacherous descent from the cave complex. The path was barely visible, a game trail at best, winding precariously down the mountainside through loose scree and stunted pine. Clara led alert for signs of additional patrols or the scout they'd observed earlier. The descent took nearly an hour, requiring careful navigation to avoid creating obvious tracks or dislodging rocks that might signal their passage. At the tree line they paused in a small clearing, the moment of separation at hand. Clara, dismounted, approached Murchison and Samuel. "Northeast through the forest," she instructed. "Follow the creek when you reach it. It will lead to a trading post at the territorial border. From there, the mining settlements are 3 days' ride." Murchison nodded. "And you, still planning on Santa Fe?" "Eventually." Clara's decision was made. "I need to return to Devil's Backbone first." Both Murchison and Samuel stared at her in shock. "Have you lost your mind?" Murchison demanded. "They'll shoot you on sight." "Not if they don't see me." Clara outlined her reasoning. "The documents I have aren't enough. Grant kept additional files records that would prove his past crimes. I need those records to balance against his current position to ensure the full truth comes out." "And you think you can just walk into a military fortress and find these theoretical files?" "I think I know Devil's Backbone better than anyone alive, including its hidden approaches and secret passages." Clara's confidence wasn't bravado. She'd spent years at the outpost during her scouting days, knew its layout intimately, and I think the current chaos following Grant's death creates an opportunity that won't exist later. Murchison studied her face, recognized the determination there. "Nothing I say will change your mind, will it?" "No, but your priority remains unchanged. Get Samuel to safety." The boy in question had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now he spoke up. "I want to go with you." Clara shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. What I'm attempting is stupid and dangerous," Murchison interrupted. "But she's right about one thing, boy. You need to be as far from Devil's Backbone as possible." Samuel looked between them, clearly torn between loyalty to Clara and recognition of the logic in their position. Finally he nodded. "Promise you'll find us after." Clara couldn't make that promise with certainty, but she nodded anyway. "I'll find you," she said, hoping it wasn't a lie. They embraced briefly, an awkward but genuine display of the connection that had formed between them in their short time together. Then Clara stepped back, remounted her horse. 2 days, she said to Murchison. "If I haven't found you by then, don't wait. Take him north as far as necessary." The old tracker nodded solemnly. "Good hunting, Clara Blackwood." "And you, friend." With a final nod to Samuel, Clara turned her horse westward and rode into the forest, creating an obvious trail that pursuers would easily follow. She would maintain this direction for several miles before doubling back, using streams and rocky ground to obscure her true path south toward Devil's Backbone. She didn't look back. Couldn't afford the emotional toll of seeing Samuel's face again, of acknowledging the near certainty that she was riding toward her death. Justice had a price. She'd always known that. Had accepted it when she'd embarked on this path of vengeance for Thomas's murder. Now she would pay it in full. The journey back to Devil's Backbone took 2 days of careful travel, avoiding patrols and settlements, moving primarily at night when her passage would be less visible. Clara used every skill acquired during her years as a scout, crossing streams to hide her scent, and tracks traveling on rocky ground that held no impressions, navigating by stars rather than following established trails. By the dawn of the 3rd day, she reached a ridge overlooking the outpost from the north, the opposite direction from their escape, the direction least likely to be heavily guarded. Through her field glass, she studied the fortress, noting changes since her departure. The damage from Murchison's diversion was evident. One section of the compound remained blackened from fire, temporary structures erected to replace destroyed buildings. Activity appeared normal otherwise. Guards at their posts, patrols departing and returning, the routine of military life continuing despite the disruption of Grant's assassination. Clara focused her attention on the command building where she'd shot Grant, particularly the underground entrance she'd noted during her brief time inside the fortress. The powder magazine where, according to intelligence gathered before their infiltration, special materials were stored, including potentially Grant's personal files and records. Security appeared heightened around this area. Additional guards limited access. Whatever was stored below clearly remained a priority. Clara settled into a concealed position, observing patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. She would have one opportunity to enter the fortress, locate the files, and escape. No room for error, no second chances. As darkness fell, she finalized her plan. The north wall, where it adjoined a steep ravine, showed minimal guard presence, a logical weakness as the terrain made conventional approach nearly impossible. For someone with Clara's climbing skills, however, it presented the most viable point of entry. She left her horse secured in a hidden gully, approached the ravine on foot, carrying only essential equipment, her Remington, a hunting knife rope, and the treaty portfolio still secured inside her jacket. The climb would be challenging, particularly in darkness, but she'd navigated worse during her scouting days. The ravine narrowed as it approached the fortress wall, its sides growing steeper until they became near vertical. Clara began her ascent, testing each handhold carefully, using natural features in the rock face rather than imposing regular patterns that might be spotted by sentries. Progress was slow, deliberate. Halfway up, her wounded shoulder protested sharply, the exertion reopening the barely healed injury. Clara gritted her teeth against the pain, continued climbing. The junction of ravine and fortress wall presented the greatest challenge, a gap of several feet between the highest accessible point in the ravine and the base of the wall itself. Clara studied it in the dim moonlight, calculating angles and options. The wall at this point rose perhaps 20 feet above the ravine floor, formidable but not impossible. Its stone construction offered numerous small crevices and protrusions that could serve as handholds. The risk came not from the climb itself, but from exposure during the final approach across the gap. Clara secured her rope to a sturdy pine growing improbably from the ravine wall, tested its strength, then used it to swing across the gap to the base of the fortress wall. The impact sent fresh pain through her shoulder, but she maintained her grip, pressed herself flat against the stone to minimize visibility. No alarm sounded. No increased activity visible along the wall's top. She'd made it undetected. The climb up the wall itself proved easier than anticipated. Years of weather had eroded the mortar between stones, creating numerous handholds. Clara ascended steadily, pausing frequently to listen for sentries patrolling the walkway above. At the top, she hung suspended just below the parapet, listening intently. Footsteps approached, a guard making his rounds. Clara held perfectly still, controlling her breathing, counting the steps as they passed directly above her position, then continued onward. Timing her movement precisely, she pulled herself over the parapet during the interval between patrols, dropping silently onto the walkway. Pressing herself into the shadow of a small storage shed, she oriented herself within the fortress. The command building stood approximately 50 yards away across the main courtyard. Currently deserted in the late night hours, illuminated only by scattered lanterns marking sentry positions. Between her position and the command building lay open ground, dangerous to cross directly. Clara studied the layout, noting auxiliary structures, shadow patterns, potential cover. A route formed in her mind, circuitous but significantly safer than direct approach. She moved silently along the wall until reaching a point where a row of supply sheds extended toward the center of the compound. Using these for cover, she advanced in careful stages, pausing frequently to assess patrol patterns and sentry positions. The military precision she'd observed earlier proved an advantage. Guards moved in predictable patterns, creating regular windows of opportunity between their passages. Clara exploited these gaps, ghosting from shadow to shadow, invisible to all but the most alert observer. Reaching the rear of the command building, she encountered her next challenge, the entrance to the underground magazine. As expected, it was guarded, 2 soldiers flanking the heavy steel door, alert despite the late hour. Clara observed them from concealment, assessing options. Direct confrontation would create noise alert the entire compound. Deception seemed the better approach, but what pretense would grant her access to a restricted area in the middle of the night? The answer came as she watched a third soldier approach the guards, exchange brief words, and be admitted through the steel door. Not an officer based on his uniform, but someone with authorization to enter. Someone expected. Clara studied his appearance, noting distinguishing features and mannerisms. Similar in build to herself, though male and slightly taller. The uniform would be the key. She needed to acquire appropriate attire, and quickly. Moving away from the command building, she circled toward the barracks area, seeking an opportunity. A laundry outbuilding provided the solution. Uniforms hanging to dry unattended in the late hour. Clara selected one approximately her size, slipped it over her own clothing, added a cap pulled low to shadow her features. The transformation wouldn't withstand close scrutiny, but in the dimly lit compound, with proper confidence and bearing, it might suffice for the brief interaction required to enter the magazine. Properly attired, Clara approached the guards, directly adopting the purposeful stride of a soldier on assignment. As she drew closer, one guard straightened hand, moving to his weapon. "Halt. Identify yourself." "Private Miller," Clara responded crisply, pitching her voice low. "Relief for Sergeant Ellis. Inventory duty." The guard frowned. "Wasn't informed of a relief schedule." "Last-minute change, sir. Sergeant Ellis took ill after mess. Lieutenant Wilson ordered immediate replacement." Clara gestured toward the door with just the right mixture of deference and impatience, a junior soldier eager to complete an unwanted assignment. The guards exchanged glances, clearly weighing the risk of turning away a legitimate relief against allowing unauthorized access. Clara maintained her posture, projecting confident expectation. "Wait here," the senior guard decided. He opened the door slightly, called inside, "Sergeant Ellis, you expecting relief?" A moment of breathless tension as Clara prepared for either success or immediate flight. Then, from within, a muffled response she couldn't quite hear. The guard listened, nodded, then turned back to Clara. "Proceed." He opened the door wider. "Direct to inventory section only. No deviation." Clara saluted crisply. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." She passed between them into the cool darkness beyond heart-pounding despite her outward calm. The deception had worked, for now. But inside awaited the mysterious Sergeant Ellis, who would instantly recognize her as an imposter. The passage beyond the door descended steeply stone steps, worn smooth by years of use. Lanterns at regular intervals provided minimal illumination, casting long shadows that both concealed and confused. Clara moved deliberately, alert for sounds that would indicate the sergeant's location. The passage opened into a large underground chamber. The original powder magazine expanded significantly since Clara's time at Devil's Backbone. Metal shelving lined the walls, stacked with crates and equipment. The center contained tables where several soldiers worked, apparently conducting inventory, as suggested by her cover story. Clara spotted her target immediately. A middle-aged sergeant directing the operation, gesturing toward various crates as he consulted a ledger. He hadn't noticed her entry, focused on his task. She needed to avoid him entirely. If he saw her, questions would be asked that she couldn't credibly answer. Scanning the chamber quickly, Clara identified a promising area, a section partially obscured by stacked crates, accessible via a narrow side passage. If Grant had maintained private records separate from official inventories, they would likely be secured in a less trafficked area. She slipped into shadow as the sergeant turned in her direction, timing her movement to coincide with the adjustment of a lantern by one of the working soldiers. The momentary shadow concealed her passage into the side corridor unobserved. The passage narrowed eventually, terminating at a small wooden door, locked, but with a key conveniently hanging beside it. Not high security, suggesting contents of limited value or interest to common soldiers. Perfect for private files. Clara retrieved the key, unlocked the door with minimal noise, and slipped inside, closing it behind her. A single lantern burned low on a desk, illuminating what appeared to be a private office, sparse but functional, with filing cabinets against one wall and a map table dominating the center. This, she realized, had been Grant's secondary workspace, where he conducted business too sensitive for his main office, where records of his true operations would be maintained. Moving quickly but methodically, Clara searched the filing cabinets, scanning labels and contents. Most contained mundane military records, personnel files, supply requisitions, patrol reports. Nothing immediately incriminating. The desk proved more promising. A locked drawer yielded to her knife after brief manipulation, revealing a leather-bound journal similar to the official portfolio she already carried. Clara opened it, scanned the contents by the dim lantern light. Pages of handwritten notes in Grant's distinctive script detailing transactions and communications far beyond the scope of his official diplomatic mission. Financial arrangements with private interests on both sides of the border. Intelligence sold to Mexican officials during the border conflicts. Lists of military personnel sacrificed to maintain his cover or eliminate potential threats. Names Clara recognized. Dates that matched operations she'd participated in. Evidence that confirmed everything she'd suspected about Grant's treachery, including the mission that had resulted in William's death. Clara's breath caught as she found the entry. Clinical detached description of altering patrol routes to ensure a supply caravan would encounter hostile forces. Deliberate sacrifice of the escort detail, including civilian family members traveling with the caravan, including her son. Clara closed the journal, secured it inside her jacket alongside the official portfolio. Together they told the complete story. Grant's legitimate diplomatic role in the present contrasted with his treasonous activities in the past. Evidence that might at least partially justify her actions if she could deliver it to Judge Williams in Santa Fe. She had what she came for. Now she needed to escape quickly before her deception was discovered. Clara extinguished the lantern, returned to the door, listened for activity in the passage beyond. Hearing nothing, she slipped out, relocked the door, replaced the key. The main chamber remained occupied. Sergeant and soldiers continuing their inventory work. She would need another exit. Retracing her steps through the main chamber past the guards at the entrance carried too high a risk of discovery. Clara explored deeper into the side passage, searching for alternative routes. The original powder magazine had been built with multiple access points, safety features in case of explosion or attack. If those auxiliary passages remained open, they might provide the escape route she needed. The passage continued beyond Grant's private office, descending further into the bedrock beneath Devil's Backbone. The air grew cooler, damper. Lanterns became less frequent, forcing Clara to navigate by touch along rough-hewn walls. Eventually she felt, rather than saw, a branching in the passage, a draft of slightly fresher air coming from her right. Following this current, she discovered a narrower tunnel terminating at what appeared to be a dead end. Except it wasn't. Exploring with her hands, Clara found a metal ladder embedded in the rock face, ascending vertically into darkness. An emergency exit, perhaps, or maintenance access to the levels above. She began climbing the metal rungs, cold beneath her fingers. Her wounded shoulder protested each movement, but she pushed through the pain, focused on the imperative of escape. The ladder extended upward for what felt like dozens of feet before terminating at a heavy wooden trapdoor. Clara tested it cautiously, locked or barred from above. A dead end after all. She hung suspended beneath the trapdoor, considering options. Return to the main chamber and attempt the original entrance. Search for another auxiliary passage. Both carried significant risks of discovery. Then she noticed it. A simple locking mechanism on the underside of the trapdoor. Not designed to prevent exit from below, but to secure the door against intrusion from above. With careful manipulation, it released with a soft click. Clara pushed upward gently. The trapdoor rose without resistance, revealing star-filled sky beyond. She emerged cautiously, finding herself in a small, roofless structure near the western wall of the fortress, an abandoned guard post based on its construction and position. Perfect. The western wall abutted a steep slope less sheer than the ravine she'd climbed to enter, but still challenging enough to discourage conventional approach or escape. With care, it would provide her exit route. Clara secured the trapdoor behind her, oriented herself within the compound. No guards visible in her immediate vicinity, this section of wall apparently considered secure enough to warrant minimal supervision. Moving silently, she approached the parapet, surveyed the terrain beyond. The slope descended sharply for approximately 40 feet before gradually leveling into forested land. Navigable, especially with her rope, but exposed during the initial descent. She had no choice. Dawn approached. Already the eastern sky showed the first hints of lightning. Discovery would become inevitable with increased daylight and activity. Clara secured her rope to a merlin in the wall, tested its strength, then began her descent down the outer face of the fortress. The stone offered fewer handholds than the ravine wall, forcing her to rely more heavily on the rope controlling her descent through friction rather than finding secure footing. Halfway down, disaster struck. Her wounded shoulder, strained beyond endurance, suddenly gave way. Clara lost her grip, swung wildly away from the wall, then crashed back against it with bruising force. The impact dislodged loose stones which clattered down the slope beneath her with alarming noise. Clara hung suspended, fighting to regain control, acutely aware of the sound carrying in the pre-dawn stillness. "Hey, who's there?" The challenge came from above, a sentry alerted by the falling stones. Clara abandoned caution, rappelled down the remaining wall in a controlled fall, ignoring the searing pain in her shoulder. She hit the slope below at speed, lost her footing, and tumbled several yards before managing to arrest her slide. "Intruder on the west wall!" The cry went up, followed immediately by the sharp report of a rifle. Bullets impacted the slope around her as Clara scrambled downward, using the growing light to find secure footing. More shouts from above. The alarm bell began to ring. Clara increased her pace, half running, half sliding down the steep incline, using her good arm to maintain balance while protecting the precious documents secured inside her jacket. Reaching the tree line, she plunged into the forest without hesitation, changing direction immediately to confuse pursuers. Behind her, the sounds of mobilization grew, voices calling, horses being readied. The hunt would begin in earnest within minutes. Clara moved deeper into the forest, navigating by instinct more than plan. Her primary goal now was distance, putting as much ground as possible between herself and Devil's Backbone before organized pursuit could be deployed. Her horse remained hidden in the gully where she'd left it, approximately 2 miles northwest of her current position. Reaching it would provide significant advantage in the coming chase, but required crossing open terrain that would leave her dangerously exposed. A risk she had to take. On foot, recapture was virtually certain. Clara circled wide to approach the gully from the west, using terrain features to detect potential ambush. No signs of pursuit yet in this direction. The initial response would focus on the area directly beneath her escape point. She reached the gully as the sun breached the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. Her horse remained where she'd left it, nervous but unharmed. Clara mounted quickly, orienting herself toward the south, toward Santa Fe, toward Judge Williams, toward the slim chance of justifying her actions. A day's hard ride might reach the territorial border by nightfall. From there, another day to Santa Fe itself. If she pushed the horse to its limits, maintained awareness for pursuit, avoided settlements and known patrol routes, it was possible. Barely. Clara urged the horse forward, settling into a ground-covering trot that balanced speed against endurance. The animal responded willingly, perhaps sensing her urgency. They traveled south throughout the morning, Clara alternating between different gaits to preserve the horse's strength while maintaining good progress. She avoided trails, navigating cross-country through terrain that would slow pursuit while remaining passable on horseback. By midday, she'd covered impressive distance, the silhouette of Devil's Backbone long since disappeared behind the northern horizon. No signs of immediate pursuit, though Clara harbored no illusions that the search had been abandoned. Riders would be following, likely splitting to cover multiple potential routes. She paused briefly at a small stream, allowing her horse to drink while she consulted her mental map of the territory. The most direct route to Santa Fe would take her through settled areas, past ranches and trading posts where word of her passage might reach pursuers. A longer route through more challenging terrain offered greater security, but would add at least a day to her journey, time she wasn't certain she could spare. The documents she carried were valuable only if delivered, only if their contents became known beyond her small circle. Clara decided on compromise, maintaining her southern heading, but staying west of the established trails, using the foothills of the San Pedro Mountains to shield her passage. It would require careful navigation and some difficult terrain, but provided the best balance of speed and security. As she prepared to continue, Clara became aware of a distant sound, the rhythm of hoofbeats, multiple horses moving at speed. She tensed, scanning the horizon behind her. Nothing visible yet, but the sound was unmistakable. Pursuit had found her trail sooner than expected. Clara, mounted quickly, urged her horse into a canter, seeking the shelter of a nearby pine forest. Once within its confines, she changed direction, heading southwest rather than due south, hoping to confuse trackers with the sudden shift. The sounds grew closer despite her evasive maneuvers. These weren't random searchers, but dedicated trackers, professionals following signs she hadn't adequately concealed in her push for distance. Within the hour, Clara caught her first glimpse of the pursuit. 6 riders moving in loose formation, following her trail with methodical precision. Their distance, perhaps half a mile back, gave her temporary advantage, but their fresh horses would inevitably overtake her tired mount. She needed to create separation to break their ability to track directly. Ahead, the terrain offered potential solution, a rocky ridge with a swift-flowing stream at its base. If she could cross the water, use the rocks to leave minimal sign. Clara urged her horse toward the ridge, pushing it harder than she would have preferred. The animal responded gamely, but she could feel its labored breathing, the slight unevenness in its stride, indicating growing fatigue. Reaching the stream, she guided her mount into the water, following its course downstream for several hundred yards before emerging at a point where massive boulders lined the bank. Careful to leave minimal sign, she navigated through this rocky terrain, eventually reaching the ridge itself. From this elevated position, Clara could see her pursuers clearly for the first time. They'd reached the stream, were examining her entry point with clear frustration. She'd bought time but not escape. These men, she recognized Vaughn among them, would persist until they found her trail again. She had perhaps 30 minutes advantage. Not enough to reach safety, but perhaps enough to prepare a more definitive solution to her pursuit problem. Clara studied the terrain ahead, searching for tactical advantage. The ridge descended into a narrow canyon, a potential bottleneck where her pursuers would be channeled into a predictable path. With proper preparation, it might offer opportunity to eliminate or at least discourage further chase. She urged her tired horse down the far side of the ridge, reaching the canyon entrance with precious minutes to spare. Dismounting, Clara secured the animal in a concealed position, then quickly gathered what she needed: deadfall branches, loose rocks, the remaining stick of dynamite she'd carried since Copper Springs. Working rapidly, she constructed a simple but effective trap at the narrowest point in the canyon. The dynamite, positioned carefully among rocks above the passage, would trigger a significant slide when detonated. Proper timing was critical. Too early and the pursuers would simply find another route. Too late, and she'd be captured before the trap could be sprung. Clara positioned herself on an elevated outcropping with clear line of sight to both the trap and the canyon entrance. Rifle ready, she waited as the minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Eventually, movement at the canyon entrance, the lead rider appearing, followed closely by the others. Vaughn himself rode second, his distinctive figure unmistakable even at distance. They proceeded cautiously but steadily, clearly confident they had their quarry cornered. Clara aimed carefully, waiting until the lead riders reached the optimal position beneath her prepared rock slide. One shot properly placed would detonate the dynamite, triggering the avalanche that would block pursuit. She drew a deep breath, steadied her aim, began to apply pressure to the trigger. "Don't!" The voice came from behind her, startling in its suddenness. Clara spun rifle, swinging toward the new threat. Samuel stood there, small figure silhouetted against the afternoon sky. "Samuel." Clara lowered her weapon slightly, disbelief warring with concern. "How? What are you doing here?" "Following you," the boy replied simply. "Like you taught me. Stay downwind. Move careful. Don't leave sign." Clara glanced back toward the canyon where her pursuers continued their approach, unaware of the trap awaiting them. "You should be with Murchison. You should be safe." "He tried to take me north," Samuel explained. "I didn't want to go. Slipped away while he slept." You've been tracking me since the caves. Clara couldn't keep the astonishment from her voice. Alone? Samuel nodded. Not hard. You weren't hiding your trail much. A mixture of pride and horror filled Clara. Pride at the boy's remarkable skill and determination, horror at the danger he'd placed himself in. And now he stood exposed on a mountainside mere minutes from a violent confrontation between Clara and her pursuers. Samuel, you need to hide. Now. She gestured urgently toward a cluster of boulders. Those men will kill you without hesitation if they find you here. The boy didn't move. Are you going to kill them with that? He pointed toward the rigged dynamite. Clara hesitated. I'm going to stop them from following us. The slide will block the canyon, not harm them directly. But they might get hurt anyway, Samuel persisted. They might die. Yes, Clara admitted. They might. Samuel considered this with solemn intensity. There are 6 of them, and the horses would die too. The simple statement, delivered with a child's innocent clarity, struck Clara forcefully. In her focus on escape, on completing her mission, she'd calculated only tactical advantage, not the full moral weight of her actions. Vaughn deserved whatever fate befell him. He'd killed Thomas, had threatened Samuel himself. But the others, soldiers following orders, performing their duty as they understood it, and the innocent animals who served them. Please hide, Samuel, she said again, decision crystallizing even as she spoke. I need to change plans. The boy studied her face, seemed to recognize her internal shift, and nodded. He disappeared behind the boulder cluster as Clara turned back to the approaching riders. They had nearly reached the trap position. Clara raised her rifle, adjusted her aim slightly, and fired. The bullet struck rock well above and to the side of the dynamite, sending chips flying, but leaving the explosive untriggered. The riders below reacted instantly, scattering for cover, weapons drawn. Vaughn! Clara called, voice echoing from the canyon walls. I know you're there. A moment of silence, then a response. Blackwood. That you? It's me, she confirmed. We need to talk. Derisive laughter floated up from below. Talk. After you shot a general, after you stole classified documents, I think that time has passed. I have something you want, Clara replied. The treaty portfolio, Grant's personal journals. A pause, then. And why would you offer those to me? Because I'm tired of running. Because there's an innocent child involved who deserves better than being hunted across territories. Clara drew a deep breath. Because I'm willing to surrender in exchange for his safety. Another longer silence. Clara could imagine the discussion occurring below, weighing the value of immediate capture against the cost of potential resistance. Finally, Vaughn's voice again. Show yourself, hands visible. Clara stood slowly, rifle held crosswise to demonstrate non-threatening intent. I'm coming down, no tricks. She descended carefully, hyper-aware of multiple weapons trained on her position. As she reached the canyon floor, the riders emerged from their cover positions, forming a loose semicircle with Vaughn at the center. Weapons on the ground, he ordered. Slow. Clara complied, placing her rifle and revolver on the rocky soil. The boy goes free, she said. That's my only condition. Vaughn's eyes narrowed. What boy? Before Clara could respond, movement from above caught everyone's attention. Samuel appeared at the edge of the outcropping, small figure silhouetted against the sky. That boy, Clara said quietly. He's innocent in all this, just an orphan caught in circumstances beyond his control. Vaughn studied the child briefly, then returned his attention to Clara. The documents first, then we discuss the boy. Clara reached slowly inside her jacket, withdrew both the official portfolio and Grant's personal journal. She held them out, not quite offering them, not quite withholding. I want your word, your personal guarantee that he'll be taken to safety, not returned to Devil's Backbone. You're hardly in position to negotiate, Vaughn pointed out, gesturing toward her discarded weapons. I'm in exactly the position to negotiate. Clara smiled thinly. Look up just above your position. See that package wedged between the boulders? One shot, from you, from me, from anyone, and this entire canyon becomes your tomb. Vaughn glanced upward, noted the dynamite positioned precisely where she'd described. His expression hardened. "You'd die too." "I probably die either way," Clara replied with calm certainty. "The difference is whether I die alone or take 6 soldiers and their horses with me, whether Samuel witnesses a massacre or is given a chance at life." A tense silence fell across the canyon. The other soldiers looked to Vaughn for direction, clearly unsettled by this unexpected development. "The boy goes to Bennett's Crossing," Vaughn said finally. "To the doctor you mentioned when you first freed him. My word on it." Clara studied his face, searching for deception. "And you'll give him a horse supplies for the journey. Don't push your luck, Blackwood." "It's not luck I'm concerned with." Clara held his gaze steadily. "It's your honor, such as it may be." Something like grudging respect flickered across Vaughn's features. "Fine. Horse basic supplies. But the documents first." Clara nodded, extended the portfolio and journal more decisively. "Samuel," she called, not taking her eyes from Vaughn. "Come down, carefully." The boy descended the slope with remarkable agility, positioning himself beside Clara. She placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "These men are taking you to Dr. Chambers in Bennett's Crossing," she told him quietly. "He's a good man. He'll ensure you're cared for properly." Samuel looked up at her, eyes wide with understanding and fear. "You're not coming." "No, I have to answer for my actions." Clara squeezed his shoulder gently. "But you'll be safe. That's what matters." "I don't want to go without you," the boy protested, voice breaking slightly. "I know." Clara knelt to his level, meeting his eyes directly. "But sometimes the most important battles are the ones we choose not to fight. Sometimes surrender isn't weakness but strength. Understanding when a cause is worth dying for, and when life, especially an innocent life like yours, is more valuable than any principle." Samuel absorbed this, tears brimming, but not falling. "Will I see you again?" Clara couldn't lie to him, not now. "Probably not, but you'll carry what I've taught you, what I hope I've shown you about courage, about honor, about doing what's right even when it's difficult." The boy nodded solemnly. "I'll remember." "Good." Clara embraced him briefly, fiercely, then stood to face Vaughn again. "Your guarantee. In front of your men. In front of the boy." Vaughn nodded. "The boy goes to Bennett's Crossing. Horse supplies, safe passage. You have my word." Clara handed over the documents, watching as Vaughn examined them briefly before securing them inside his own jacket. "The general dead?" she asked. "Yes." Vaughn's expression revealed nothing. "Buried with military honors 3 days ago." Clara absorbed this without visible reaction, though internally she felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and regret. Grant had died as he'd lived. His true nature concealed his crimes, unknown to those who honored him. Perhaps that would change now. Perhaps the documents she'd surrendered would find their way to proper authorities, would reveal at least part of the truth. Or perhaps they would be buried alongside their author, inconvenient facts erased from official record. Either way, her part in the story was ending. She had done what she could. Had sought justice, had perhaps achieved vengeance instead, but had ultimately chosen mercy, for Samuel, for the soldiers before her, even for herself. "One last request," Clara said as Vaughn signaled his men to secure her. "Let me say a proper goodbye." After brief consideration, he nodded. Clara turned back to Samuel, who watched with solemn intensity as her hands were bound behind her back. "Remember what I told you about survival," she said quietly. "About reading terrain, about using what's available, about trusting your instincts." The boy nodded. "I will. And remember this too. Your life is your own now, not defined by what's happened to you, but by what you choose to do with each day you're given." Clara smiled gently. "Make those choices count, Samuel." "I promise," he whispered. One of the soldiers approached with a horse, a sturdy pinto separated from their group. "For the boy," he explained, handing the reins to Samuel. "Saddlebags have food, water, basic supplies." Vaughn pointed eastward. "Bennett's Crossing is 2 days that direction. Follow the main trail, you can't miss it. Ask for Dr. Chambers when you arrive." Samuel looked to Clara once more, clearly torn between following instructions and refusing to leave her. "Go," she urged gently. "Live, Samuel, for both of us." With visible reluctance, the boy mounted the pinto, adjusted himself in the saddle. "I won't forget you," he promised. "Nor I you," Clara replied. "Now go, before the light fades." She watched as Samuel turned his horse eastward, beginning the journey toward Bennett's Crossing. Only when his small figure had disappeared beyond the canyon's edge did she allow herself to be mounted on another horse, hands still bound, surrounded by her captors. "Santa Fe?" she asked Vaughn, who rode beside her. He nodded. "Military tribunal, given the circumstances, likely to be swift." Clara understood what remained unspoken. Swift trial, swift sentence, swift execution. She had assassinated a general, disrupted a major diplomatic mission. Justice would be equally decisive. She felt a curious peace descend as they rode southward opposite the direction Samuel had taken. She had failed in many ways, had not secured official recognition of Grant's crimes, had not properly avenged Thomas, or William had not even managed to deliver the evidence to Judge Williams as planned. But she had saved Samuel, had placed his welfare above her mission, her vengeance ultimately even above her own survival. Perhaps that, in the end, was the greater victory, the true redemption. As they made camp that evening, Clara sat apart from the soldiers, hands still bound, contemplating the stars above. Vaughn approached, offered water, which she accepted with a nod of thanks. "Why'd you do it?" he asked after a moment. "Surrender when you had us cornered, when you could have triggered that dynamite, ended it all right there." Clara considered the question, its multiple layers. "Because Samuel was watching," she said finally. "Because I wanted him to see that there are choices beyond violence, beyond vengeance. That sometimes surrender isn't defeat, but triumph of a different kind." Vaughn studied her with new respect. "The boy means that much to you. He represents everything I've lost, everything I fought for." Clara met his gaze steadily. "And perhaps something I found along the way without realizing I was looking for it. Redemption, purpose, beyond hatred, beyond the past." Clara looked toward the eastern horizon where Samuel journeyed toward safety. "Something worth preserving even at the cost of my own life." Vaughn nodded, slowly understanding, if not necessarily agreeing. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'll make sure the documents reach the proper authorities. Whatever they reveal about Grant, truth has its own weight." "Thank you," Clara replied, surprised by the concession. "It matters even if I won't be there to see the consequences." They fell silent, the night deepening around them. Clara returned her gaze to the stars, finding familiar constellations that had guided her throughout her life as scout, as wife, as fugitive. She thought of Thomas, his gentle ways and quiet strength, of William lost before he'd truly begun to live, of Samuel carrying forward perhaps the best parts of herself, the wisdom purchased through suffering and sacrifice. And she thought of the woman she'd been, the woman she'd become, the different paths that had led her to this moment of strange contentment amid defeat. Clara Maddox, Scout Sergeant Blackwood, names and identities shed like worn clothing, leaving only the essential core of who she truly was, a survivor, a protector, ultimately a woman who had found her moral compass amid the chaos of vengeance and loss. The stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of hours as Clara drifted between wakefulness and uncertain dreams. Dawn would bring resumption of their journey toward Santa Fe, toward judgment, toward whatever end awaited her there. But somewhere to the east, Samuel rode toward a new beginning, carrying her teaching, her memory, her hope for something better than the cycle of violence that had claimed so many lives. It was enough. It had to be enough. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Clara stood face turned toward that distant promise. "I don't need to win," she whispered to the awakening world. "I only need to have lived long enough to say I was not silent." And in that moment, despite everything lost, everything sacrificed, she knew she had succeeded in the only battle that truly mattered, the one for her own soul.